Hi everyone, I know you are watching this content to accompany your sleep. So before we start, I want to know where you are watching from and what time you are watching. Also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's jump straight into the story. The case of Ivan Baldeli, a hellish love story on a heavenly island. Sometimes the search for paradise on Earth can lead one straight into a real-life hell from which escape is impossible. However, it's only fair to note that a significant factor in this journey is who accompanies you in search of this paradise. Choosing a companion should always be done with the utmost care and caution. Yet sometimes, even the person who seems closest and dearest can turn into a true, merciless monster. The tale of Ivan Baldeli and Brian Brimmager began like something out of a fairy tale. Ivan thought she had found true love, for which she was ready to run to the ends of the earth. However, from the very beginning, her relationship raised concerns among Ivan's family, who disapproved of her partner. Unfortunately, the family's worries were not unfounded. This complex case started in 2011, when a happy and in-love Ivan left with her beloved for a tropical island. As it turned out, she was heading straight towards her own demise. Only several years later, disfigured fragments of her body were discovered in the swamp, bagged alongside the remains of her cherished pets. Ivan's family exerted considerable effort to achieve justice, efforts that cost another family member their life. Who is Ivan Baldeli? Ivan Olivia Baldeli Mayfold was born on June 30th, 1969, in a small town in the southern part of sunny California. She was the third and youngest child of Marjorie and James Fold, growing up alongside her older brother Michael and sister Michelle, with whom she shared a close bond from childhood. When Ivan was 13, her mother passed away after a long illness. A year later, her father remarried to Lillian Faust, and the grown children developed wonderful relationships with their stepmother, a kind and caring woman who loved her husband's children as her own. Ivan received a solid education and explored several career paths, but her main passion was always fashion design, and she dreamed of turning her hobby into a profitable business. However, luck never seemed to be on her side when it came to her personal life. She was married twice, but both marriages ended in separation. Additionally, a surgery she underwent in her youth, followed by complications, left Ivan unable to have children. After divorcing her second husband, Kevin Baldeli, in 2007, Ivan lived alone in her small apartment with her beloved dog, whom she affectionately called her child. She remained in constant contact with her father and sister, calling them almost daily and making an effort to see her family at least once a month. Meeting Brian and the love triangle. In 2009, as Ivan was preparing to celebrate her 40th birthday, she met a Marine named Brian Brimmager. At that time, he was legally married and raising a young son with his wife. Despite this, Brian was open to having an affair and shared with his mistress how unhappy he was in his marriage, claiming he hadn't filed for divorce solely because of his child, whom he didn't want to distress. Baldeli fell for this fit and handsome man at first sight and believed every word he said. Having experienced the pain of a loveless marriage herself, and knowing how hard it can be to leave such a relationship, she didn't rush her partner, believing that the presence of a child was indeed the main obstacle. However, Brian wasn't as straightforward and sincere as he appeared. From a young age, his attractive looks had made him very popular with the opposite sex. He was accustomed to juggling multiple relationships simultaneously and expertly deceived the women who fell for him, promising each one marriage, a family, and eternal love. It soon came to light that the married Brimmager was not only seeing Ivan, but also had another mistress. This other woman was Christine Verhoeven, a stunning blonde with extensive connections. She was an analyst at the White House and had made a remarkable career during George W. Bush Jr.'s administration. When Ivan discovered the existence of another rival, she decided to confront the issue head-on and was ready to fight for the man she loved. Gathering her courage, she called her lover's wife to inform her that Brian was cheating on her with not just one, but two women. This revelation sparked a major scandal, forcing Brian to make a difficult choice. Eventually, he chose Ivan, though it's possible she pressured him into making this decision. A few months later, Brian officially divorced his wife and moved in with his new love interest. At that time, he was still serving in the Marines, but had been contemplating ending his military career for a while. The couple seemed genuinely happy, but Ivan's relatives remained wary of her new partner, doubting the sincerity of his feelings. Moving to a tropical paradise. In the summer of 2011, Brian began to talk about radically changing his life, leaving the service, moving away from the bustling city and settling down on the tropical island. Ivan shared his sentiments, supported him in everything, and was ready to follow him wherever and whenever he decided. She believed she had met the most important man in her life and adored him. By September of the same year, the decision was final. The couple chose to move to Panama and settle on the small island of Carnero, a place that could truly be called a paradise. Ivan informed her family just before leaving, so they had no chance to persuade her to reconsider. Ivan sold her apartment, quit her job, and started packing for the journey. She took only a few bikini, shorts, tank tops, and her sewing machine, hoping to fulfill her dream of opening a small boutique to create and sell custom outfits to tourists on the new island. In early September, Brian, Ivan, and her beloved little dog flew to Panama. They spent a couple of days in the country's capital before taking a ferry to Carnero Island, where they rented a house right on the oceanfront. The climate was hot and humid with little temperature variation, attracting a steady flow of tourists throughout the year, primarily diving and surfing enthusiasts. The island was just 1 square kilometer, so one could leisurely walk around it in about an hour. All the infrastructure was located along the coast, while the interior was dense jungle and swampy areas teeming with venomous snakes, spiders, and other wildlife, making it unsafe to venture into. Brian, who had been an excellent guitar player since his youth, brought his instrument with the intention of starting a musical career on the island, performing in entertainment venues. Within a week after moving, he had made connections with several local bar owners, and one of them happily offered him a job. He played in the evenings, entertaining the crowd, but his appreciative audience often bought him drinks as a compliment, leading him to drink heavily almost daily. Ivan's business also developed very slowly, with weak sales and virtually no profit. However, she didn't lose heart. She started working at one of the bars, and even adopted a second dog she found on the island and decided to keep. She communicated with her sister Michelle Valenzuela almost daily, sharing everything, but her messages became increasingly shorter and more somber, which worried her family. The first few months on the island seemed like paradise to the couple. Ivan hoped that Brian would propose, and they would have a romantic wedding ceremony on the ocean shore. But time passed. Brian didn't rush into marriage, and their relationship rapidly deteriorated. The mysterious disappearance. In early December, Michelle stopped receiving messages from Ivan, which raised her concerns significantly. Then, on December 14, 2011, Brian unexpectedly called Michelle, inquiring when he could stop by to pick up his SUV, which he had left in her garage before heading to Panama. This call in question caught Michelle off guard. It meant Brian had returned to the U.S. and wanted to retrieve his vehicle. But where was Ivan? Why hadn't she come back or even called? In response, Brian claimed he had explained everything in an email sent a few days earlier. He also mentioned that his now ex-girlfriend had supposedly sent her a message explaining the situation. Michelle checked her messages but found nothing, so she turned to her email. Indeed, there were 2 unread messages, one from her sister and one from her boyfriend. In his message, Brian stated that Ivan had left him, running off with a new lover to Costa Rica. The other message, supposedly from Ivan, claimed she had left Brian upon discovering his infidelity and learning that another woman had given birth to his child. It concluded with her saying she had met another man and gone to Costa Rica with him. The other woman turned out to be Brian's old friend, Christine Verhoeven, with whom he had been involved all along, and who was pregnant with his child when he and Ivan flew to Panama. At first glance, everything seemed plausible and logical, especially since Ivan couldn't have children. The news that her partner had fathered a child with someone else could have been devastating for her. However, Ivan wasn't known for impulsive actions, and she would have certainly called her sister to discuss such significant changes in her life. Moreover, the tone of the supposed message from Ivan was somewhat odd and unlike her previous communications, which raised further suspicions. When Michelle tried to determine her sister's current whereabouts, she couldn't get any concrete information. Calls went unanswered and the messages that came through were brief and detached, saying things like, "I'm okay, I need some time, I'm not ready to talk about this." Michelle suggested that Brian should join her in filing a missing persons report. Brian appeared nervous but insisted it wasn't necessary, claiming Ivan was fine, capable of herself, and would decide when to come home on her own. Despite Brian's reluctance even to discuss the matter and his hasty departure after picking up his vehicle, a message from Ivan's phone soon arrived, stating she planned to return home in January for their father's birthday. This message provided Michelle with some relief, and she decided to wait a few more weeks, hoping Ivan would return as indicated in the message. Search efforts and surprising discoveries. By mid-January, not only had Ivan not returned home, but she also hadn't called even once during that time, and her messages had completely stopped. Moreover, Michelle was shocked to learn that Brian had gotten married to the mother of his child, Christine Verhoeven, right before the new year, which seemed very odd since he had parted ways with his former girlfriend just a few weeks before the celebration. Concerned, Michelle finally went to the police and reported her sister missing, suspecting that Ivan had not gone to Costa Rica. An official inquiry sent to Panama confirmed her fears. It was definitively established that Ivan Baldelli had not left the country. Valenzuela then turned to her cousin, a programmer, to help trace the IP address from which Ivan's messages were sent, determining their actual origin. It turned out the emails, supposedly sent by Ivan from Costa Rica in December, were actually sent from Dana Point, California, where Brian was located. The same IP address was used for an email sent by Brian himself. With the situation becoming increasingly alarming, Michelle hurriedly informed the police about her discovery. Valenzuela reached out to the FBI and the State Department, sharing her suspicions that Brian had harmed her sister in Panama, and then continued to send messages from her phone and email, pretending to be her for about a month. However, there was not enough solid evidence at the time to arrest him, so law enforcement could only interview him and continue gathering proof of his guilt. It was revealed that Brian had proposed to Christine while still in Panama with Ivan. He promised Verhoeven that he would soon return, they would get married, and raise their daughter together. Moreover, Christine was unaware that her child's father had gone to the island with another woman, as he had told her he was there on business. The family's own investigation 2 months after the woman's disappearance, her sister and niece personally flew to Panama. There, they sought the expertise of Don Winner, a former U.S. intelligence officer turned investigator specializing in locating missing U.S. citizens. They shared the story of Ivan's disappearance and the version of events provided by Brian. Winner, after listening to them, immediately expressed concern that the chances of Ivan being alive were slim. With vast experience in such investigations and leveraging his connections, Winner decided to put pressure on the Panamanian government and publicize the case, turning the disappearance of an American woman into international news. A press conference was also organized with the participation of Ivan's family members. Later, Ivan's father, stepmother, brother, and several other relatives and close friends arrived in Panama to join the search and assist the investigation. Together, they went to the tropical island of Caramaro, combing it thoroughly, yet they found no trace of Baldelli. Their search efforts were hampered by dense undergrowth and swampy marshes teeming with wildlife. In addition, the family questioned the island's residents about how well they knew Brian and Ivan and what they could say about them. It turned out that the couple had recently been heavily indulging in alcoholic beverages and were frequently involved in loud disputes, unconcerned about those around them. Almost daily, they were seen in bars drinking alcohol and having heated arguments. Furthermore, people began to notice bruises and scratches on Ivan's face and body. She almost never took off her sunglasses, seemingly to hide the bruises under her eyes. The landlord of the house the couple had rented confirmed that neighbors regularly complained about the noise, screams, and cursing coming from their residence. Simultaneously, FBI agents brought a special team of divers to the island to scour the waters around it for any potential evidence or remains of the missing woman. Unfortunately, these searches too did not yield any success. The prime suspect and the first solid evidence. From the outset, Brian was the prime suspect in the case, but there was nothing concrete to charge him with. He denied any involvement, consistently recounting the same story about his ex-partner running off with another man. It wasn't until September 21st, 2012 that Bremiger was finally interrogated, and a search was conducted in his home. At the time, his wife Christine was at work, while Brian was unemployed, staying at home with their child and indulging in his favorite pastime, playing golf. Initially, he appeared confident, repeating that Ivan had left him after finding out about his child with another woman. However, he became visibly nervous when the police mentioned that the last messages sent in Ivan's name came from his area, and expressed interest in examining the laptop found on his table. The seized laptop turned out to belong to Ivan, with messages sent from it after she supposedly fled. A photo of the missing woman with a bruise under her eye was found on the, as well as a screenshot of a conversation from November, where Brian and Christine discussed their ongoing affair and shared daughter. presumably how Baldelli learned about them. Moreover, the laptop search history from November 26, 2011 contained queries such as how to clean blood and how to remove blood from a mattress. These pieces of evidence were significant but circumstantial, since neither a body nor a mattress with bloodstains was found. The fact that Brian had been sending messages pretending to be Ivan didn't definitively prove him guilty. Soon, Don Winter discovered that before leaving Panama, Bremiger had sold a machete he owned. In an online conversation with a potential buyer, he joked that he had used it to finish off a stripper. The joke was macabre, prompting authorities to track down the new owner of the machete and seize the blade for examination, which initially revealed nothing conclusive. The police overlooked another crucial detail, Ivan's bank card, which Brian used after her disappearance. To add credibility to his story, before returning to the States, he decided to make a trip to Costa Rica and use the missing woman's card a couple of times, creating the illusion that she had indeed fled to that country. He paid for his tickets in cash and withdrew money from different locations in San Jose, draining the card before discarding it. However, Bremiger failed to consider that he was captured on surveillance cameras at the ATMs. It wasn't until July 2013, a year and a half after the woman's disappearance, that her relatives, armed with all the evidence gathered by the police, FBI agents, and Don Winter, finally managed to secure Brian's arrest. Initially, he was detained on charges of making false statements and obstructing the investigation, as there was nothing more substantial to charge him with at that time. By then, he had become a father for the second time. Christine had given birth to a son just a week before his arrest. Authorities attempted to engage the suspect in a candid conversation, offering him a chance to confess to the crime and disclose the location of the body, but Brian consistently denied any wrongdoing. His lawyer also insisted on the absence of a body or direct evidence, proving Ivan's demise and Brian's involvement in it. The gruesome discovery in the swamp just 2 months after Bremiger's arrest, a significant breakthrough occurred in the case. On the island of Caronero, a worker taking a shortcut wandered into the swampy underbrush and spotted an army backpack barely visible above the water's surface. Driven by curiosity and hoping to find something valuable or useful inside, he looked in the bag, only to recoil in horror at the sight of a human skull staring back at him. He immediately reported his find to the police, and responding officers took the backpack for examination. Inside were fragments of a human body along with the remains of 2 small dogs. The remains had been chopped up, placed in the bag, and discarded in a location where it was assumed they would never be found. DNA testing confirmed that the human remains belonged to Ivan, although limbs were missing. Pathologists also determined that she had been brutally beaten before her demise, with a broken nose, cheekbone, and several missing teeth. The demise of the dogs was probably orchestrated to lend credence to the narrative, as it seemed implausible that she would willingly leave behind her cherished pets on the island, suggesting a scenario where they were eliminated and laid to rest alongside their owner. When the chop marks found on the victim's bones were matched with the blade of the machete, there was no doubt. The body had been dismembered using this weapon, as each blade has its own signature, akin to a person's fingerprints. With this evidence, Brian was formally charged with murder, dismemberment, and concealing a crime. The trial and verdict in early 2014, Michelle Valenzuela was diagnosed with an advanced stage of aggressive cancer. She had been so consumed by the investigation into her sister's case that she neglected her deteriorating health, postponing visits to the doctor. After undergoing intensive treatment for about 6 months and realizing it was in vain, she decided to dedicate the last months of her life to seeking justice for her sister. In September 2014, when doctors told Michelle she had only a few weeks left, she declared that although she was losing her battle with the disease, she would continue to fight for her sister until her last breath. Choosing to make her testimony in front of Brian, she detailed everything she knew and submitted all their correspondence with Yvonne to the court. She meticulously described Brian's actions after her sister's disappearance and then fainted from weakness. Michelle passed away 3 days later. The prosecution argued that on the evening of November 26th, following another argument with Yvonne, when she discovered Brian's communications with Christine, Brian, in a fit of rage and under the influence of alcohol, assaulted Yvonne and then fatally stabbed her. He then dismembered her body in the bathtub using the machete, also using it to take the live Yvonne's beloved dogs and place the remains in his military backpack. The limbs that didn't fit in the bag were dumped in the ocean, dropped off a rocky cliff early in the morning along with the blood-stained mattress. Brian carried the backpack deep into the island and submerged it in a swamp. For the next few weeks, he continued living in the same coastal house, meticulously erasing any evidence of the crime. He told everyone on the island a story about his flighty girlfriend leaving him for a new lover, a story that sounded convincing enough that locals sympathized with Brian, and he even managed to find a new girlfriend, Nicole Powell, who comforted him for a few weeks until his departure to the U.S. However, at the trial, Nicole testified against Brian, accusing him of lying and cruelty. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Brian was forced to admit his guilt, but insisted that it was self-defense, claiming Yvonne had first attacked him with a knife, which he then used against her. He claimed all subsequent actions were carried out in the state of shock, asserting he didn't remember dismembering and packing the body, taking the lives of the dogs, and so forth. However, his internet searches and attempts to eliminate evidence spoke to his full awareness, and attempts to fabricate a story to justify Yvonne's absence. In the spring of 2016, Brian was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to only 26 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 2035. His service in the Marines was considered during sentencing, allowing him to avoid a life sentence. Lastly, Brian's wife, Christine Verhoeven, stated she still believed in her husband's innocence and would support him no matter what. An innocent victim of her spouse's perverse passion, they say that an adult is simply impossible to re-educate because it is a formed personality with its views, way of thinking, preferences, character, and temperament. However, some women are sure that patience and pedagogical talent can work wonders. More experienced women realize that it is important from the very beginning to consider the man who is next to her, to study his shortcomings, and to understand whether she can live together with them, because falling in love and passion will pass, and the negative qualities with age will only worsen. If it is not about some minor shortcomings, but about real problems such as addictions, pathological tendency to lie and violence, and so on, it is better to run away from such a person without looking back. But in women, often in such cases, manifests the rescuer syndrome, an acute desire and irrepressible desire to help at the cost of their own well-being. It is this syndrome ruined a young British woman named Vicky Roberts, who almost 3 years struggling for her love, trying to re-educate her cheating husband with sadistic tendencies. Unfortunately for the girl, all her efforts turned out only pain, humiliation, and cruelty. Vicky and Michael Roberts. Vicky Roberts, born Victoria Smith, was born in September 1984 in the county of Cheshire in the northwest of England. She was the younger of 2 daughters in a rather conservative and deeply religious family. Together with her sister, she attended a Christian school and also practiced music and sang in the choir. People around her described her as a very kind, friendly, and helpful girl, always ready to help others. After graduating from high school, Vicky went to university and at the same time got a job in one of the stores of the chain IKEA to pay for her own education. It was there that the girl soon met a young man named Michael Roberts, with whom she first started a friendly relationship. The new acquaintance was only a year older than Vicky. He also got a job at IKEA in parallel with his studies, and he also played sports, carefully watched himself, and was able to make a pleasant impression on others. At first, the sociable and charismatic Michael seemed too talkative and overly intrusive to the modest Vicky, but he quickly managed to gain her attention and favor. It is worth saying a few words about Michael and his family. He was born in June 1983 in Warrington, Cheshire, and was the eldest of 2 sons in the family of a prominent chemical engineer. Parents brought up their children in strictness, and high expectations always laid on the eldest heir, who studied well at school, grew up ambitious, purposeful, and able to achieve what they wanted. The guy always had a lot of friends. He could easily become the soul of any company, but most of all he was proud of his victories on the love front. Michael had a bright and attractive appearance, was tall, trim, with a good sense of humor and the ability to show himself at his best. To everything else, this handsome man was also very intelligent, well-read, could easily support a conversation on any topic. Parents from childhood indoctrinated the eldest heir that he is the best, the most beautiful, intelligent, and will certainly succeed. All this probably provoked in the guy narcissistic disorder, which with age progressed. At the same time, Michael was always very afraid to upset his dad and mom, and therefore did everything to be the perfect son for them and meet all their expectations. Roberts never had a permanent girlfriend. He regularly changed girlfriends and mistresses, could spin several novels in parallel, so that none of his passions did not realize that she was not the only one. The guy was confident in his irresistibility, could find an approach to any girl, and he really liked to conquer unavailable girls. This process he perceived as a kind of game or competition. Just such a modest and inaccessible girl was Vicky, which Michael decided by all means to conquer. At first she stubbornly kept her distance and refused even innocent offers to walk after work or drink coffee somewhere. Smith spent almost all her time studying, and on weekends she went to church, so she didn't even think about dating, let alone any relationship. It took Michael a few months for Vicky to finally agree to go out with him. He was sweet, charming, touchingly courted her, gave her flowers, gifts, and little surprises. He even invited her to a family dinner at his parents' house, who liked Vicky very much and immediately approved of their son's choice. Vicky believed he was serious and gave in. He became her first man and remained the only one. She was truly happy around him, and it seemed like fate to her. Michael also seemed to fall in love and was ready to settle down, but it didn't last long. 50 Shades of Michael. From the outside their romance seemed perfect. They were both young, attractive, full of energy, ambition, and made huge plans for the future. But soon Vicky realized that her chosen one has one peculiarity, namely an irrepressible sexual appetite and passion for experimentation in bed. At first he did not put too much pressure on his chosen one in this regard, fearing that Vicky would leave him. But as soon as the guy realized that she would not go anywhere from him, he, as they say, opened the cards. The modest and religious girl was literally shocked by what was happening, but she was head over heels in love with Michael and therefore trusted him, and for a long time did not tell anyone about what was happening in their bedroom behind closed doors. In addition, her lover made her an official marriage proposal, which she gladly accepted, sincerely believing that after the wedding everything will change and the chosen one will stop his experiments. Soon one of Vicky's closest friends began to notice that she carefully disguises and hides bruises and small bruises under her clothes. She brought Smith into a frank conversation and asked if her fiancé was beating her and if she needed help. Vicky tried to deny everything, but then still admitted that all these marks are the consequences of intimate experiments. Michael, who had a special passion for binding, the use of various toys and devices. She also secretly told her friend that they have a special relationship with the chosen. Intimacy happens up to 5 times a day, while he still remains hungry and unsatisfied. Michael considered himself a skillful lover, and intimacy for him was a kind of art and a way of self-expression. Sometimes he made concessions when Vicky refused to participate in some completely crazy and even dangerous experiments, but in most cases he still managed to persuade the girl in love with him. Unplanned pregnancy. After defending her diploma, Vicky decided to change jobs and was soon hired as an account manager at a logistics company. Michael also quit IKEA and got a job as a sales consultant in one of the stores of a large retail chain, selling phones, laptops, and other electronics. He almost immediately became one of the best employees because thanks to his charisma, communication, and persuasive skills, he always exceeded sales targets. Soon the new young employee was promoted to senior salesman, and the management seriously considered his transfer to the main office, but before that he had to undergo training and improve his qualifications. Michael enjoyed attending training sessions, going on business trips to London, and was very proud of himself. He seemed to have forgotten all about his young fiancée, and only remembered when he needed intimacy. They didn't talk about each other. They hardly ever went anywhere together, and outside the bedroom Vicky seemed to cease to exist for him. At the same time, he began to have affairs on the side with colleagues, clients, and just casual acquaintances. Michael was literally obsessed and addicted to intimacy with different women, and constant new victories on the personal front were an important part of maintaining his self-esteem. At this time, Vicky discovered that she was pregnant and happily broke the news to her fiancé. They had already delayed the wedding, and it seemed to the girl that now Michael would hurry things up, but the news that he was going to be a father only made Michael angry and mad. He immediately began to insist that the child should be gotten rid of, because they are still so young, and they have their whole life ahead of them, and with offspring can wait. Vicky was shocked by such words, but flatly refused to terminate the pregnancy. Then the groom decided to press her in another way. Michael began to convince the bride that such news will cause anger in her religious parents, because their youngest favorite daughter lived with a man and got pregnant without being married. However, according to him, the termination of pregnancy will be hidden from everyone, and after the wedding they will certainly have children. For Vicky, it was a difficult decision, But her chosen one had a real gift of persuasion, so that a few days later she gave in to persuasion and went to the hospital. Unfortunately, it was not without complications. Vicky for a few days stayed in the hospital, and then it took her almost 3 weeks to recover her health. For all this period, the doctor categorically forbade her to have an intimate life, and Michael, learning about it, went into a rage. Then Vicky finally realized that he had mental problems and a real addiction to sexual contacts. Beloved literally went crazy without intimacy and began to leave the house every day, explaining it with urgent matters at work. Vicky guessed that he was looking for intimacy on the side, but sincerely hoped that everything would change once they got married and she would help him get rid of this addiction. A loveless marriage and an adult mistress. The engagement lasted almost 2 years, and the man, apparently, did not even intend to marry the chosen one, because the current state of affairs suited him quite well. He had a fiancée who faithfully waited for him at home and fully served him in the household, and numerous mistresses on the side which he regularly changed. Vicky always took him at his word, and even if she found out about his cheating, she always forgave him, as long as he promised that it was the last time and he would not do it again. But time passed. Vicky began to insist on marriage, as she wanted a full-fledged family and children. Also, this question was increasingly raised by her parents, but most importantly, the wedding was insisted on by Michael's parents, whom he really did not want to upset. Modest and sweet Vicky, they liked them very much, and they considered her a great couple for their son, and were constantly interested in when they will get married and make them happy with grandchildren. Not without the help of their parents, the couple organized a lavish wedding with a white dress, limousine, and a beautiful away ceremony. The newlyweds looked in love and happy. It seemed that they had a long life ahead of them, but hardly any of the relatives guessed about the dark side of the man, with which his young chosen one was already so well acquainted. The newlyweds settled in a large and cozy house in the prestigious area of Warrington, not far from Roberts's parents. Michael did not love his spouse, however. Marriage made him normal in the eyes of relatives and others. Vicky never complained to anyone about his strange predilections and constant cheating, and he could continue to change mistresses like gloves. At work he was quite successful, got another promotion, and was making good money. After being transferred to a new office, Michael's direct boss was a certain Carrie Hall, the head of administration at Phones for You. She was 10 years older than him, had been divorced for a long time, and was raising a son on her own. At the same time, Carrie was quite attractive, well-groomed, and, as her position required, determined and strong-willed. For a long time she did not pay any attention to the signs of attention that she was given by a young subordinate. However, for the guy it became a kind of signal to action. He sought to achieve this woman, connecting all his natural charm and eloquence, and after about a month, Carrie reciprocated. Lovers began to meet regularly in hotel rooms, and their relationship the woman later described as turbulent, passionate, and full of experimentation. Carrie was a mature, self-confident woman. She was undoubtedly flattered by the attention of such a young man, and she was also not opposed to trying something new. So Michael could realize with her those fantasies, which did not dare his modest wife. He constantly lied to his wife about being late at work, attending corporate trainings and the like, and told his mistress how unhappy he was in marriage, that this union was a mistake of youth, and said that he was ready to divorce, but his wife does not give him a divorce. This relationship with Carrie lasted more than a year, but since the woman had no illusions about Michael, she did not insist on divorce, and she was quite satisfied with their meetings in hotels. Marks on the body and dangerous games. After the beginning of relations with Michael, Carrie began to give preference to buried clothes with long sleeves and high throat, which was unusual for her. The woman was actively engaged in sports, and always liked to show others her stunning figure, and here suddenly completely changed her style. Once Hall admitted to her close friend that her lover loves to experiment in intimate terms, and sometimes these experiments go beyond reason. As evidence, she showed a bite mark on her chest, which Michael left in a fit of passion. Also on her neck there were blue marks from squeezing by his hands, and on her wrists there were marks from the ropes, with which the boyfriend liked to tie her, so that she was completely in his power. The friend was horrified and suggested that Carrie go to the police, but she refused, noting that all this was consensual, and in most cases he warns her about what he is going to do, but the process itself can get out of control. For example, Michael loved to strangle his partner, convincing her that it would increase the pleasant sensations of the process, but a couple of times he was so much carried away that she lost consciousness. Vicky was very afraid of such games with strangulation, but every time she succumbed to her husband's persuasions and believed that one day he would get tired of it, he would leave his cruel and painful experiments, or she would get used to it and would perceive them as something ordinary. Unfortunately, neither his wife nor any of his mistresses even tried to stop Michael. Open correspondence and a love letter. Vicky had guessed about her chosen one's affairs on the side, even before they were married. She most likely even realized that he was addicted to it, but sincerely believed that something was about to change, and her love and care can turn daring and loving Michael into an exemplary family man. But after the wedding, the situation only worsened, and the young husband himself denied his cheating, and he did it very convincingly. Vicky decided to conduct her own personal investigation, and looked into her husband's phone while he was sleeping. There she found numerous correspondence Michael with Carrie and several other girls, which he did not even bother to delete. Their content was quite intimate, moreover. With some girls, the guy exchanged explicit photos. This came as a shock to Vicky. She packed her things and decided to move in with her friend for a while. She did not tell her parents and sister anything about what was happening, afraid to upset them. So her family was sure that Vicky was happily married. Besides, religious relatives would have insisted on a divorce when they learned of her husband's infidelity. But after all, Vicky was in love and didn't want to break up with her husband. Leaving, she wrote Michael a touching letter in which she confessed her love for him and called the main man in her life. At the same time, she admitted that she knows about his cheating and does not want to put up with it, and therefore leaves, but gives him time to think about it and will not yet file for divorce. She wrote it all by hand on paper and left it on the refrigerator with a magnet. Michael was not touched by the message or saddened by the departure of his wife, but he did not want to lose a quiet and submissive woman who always waited for him at home, fully served in the household, and tolerated any of his antics as well as peculiar predilections. That same evening, he followed Vicky to her friend's house, picking up a large bouquet of flowers on the way. Michael on his knees apologized and begged her to return to him, promising that from now on, she would be his only woman. Vicky once again believed, or rather, she wanted to believe, and returned to their home, a new mistress. Naturally, Michael did not leave Carrie and continued to meet with other women, but for a while he was extremely careful, and even tried to come home for dinner, which his wife carefully prepared. He hid his phone, deleted correspondence, and even changed the password from his social networking page. At that time, he began to have an affair with a new young female employee of the company, Karen Wilson, not stopping the relationship with Carrie. At that time, the girl had a fiancé, and she was preparing for the wedding, but Michael began to persistently pursue her, making himself a miserable lover. He was so attracted to the new object of the hunt that after 2 months, he decided to break off the relationship with 33-year-old Carrie Hall, which he was tired of. The man told Karen a proven legend about how he is unhappy in marriage, and for the sake of her ready to leave his wife. Soon she surrendered, and between them happened intimacy right in the office, and a week after that she broke off the engagement and waited for the lover to respond. However, Michael was not going to divorce, but also to interrupt the connection with a new mistress. He did not want, and therefore just lied to her that he had already filed for divorce and moved to live in the house of his parents. Fatal blackmail. Vicky soon suspected that her spouse continued to cheat on her, and this time decided to act for sure. She took Michael's phone while he was in the shower, but could not find anything there, because he had taken into account of his previous mistakes and deleted all text messages, and on the page in the social network, now had a different password. Then Vicky waited until her husband fell asleep and took his work laptop, which he always carried with him, and on which, as it turned out, he did not leave his account in the social network. There Vicky found correspondences with an already new girlfriend, in which her husband confessed his love to her, claimed that he was divorcing his wife and living with his parents. It was a real shock for her. She took screenshots of the love and intimate messages exchanged between the couple and saved them on her laptop so that she could have proof of her husband's infidelity. Vicky also looked in her husband's wallet, where she found several folded checks for hotel rooms. In the morning, she presented all this to her spouse, and for the first time in their entire time together, she gave him a scandal. Michael was discouraged. He tried to apologize again and promised that it would not happen again. But Vicky suddenly said that she would tell his parents about everything, hoping that they would be able to talk some sense into him, since she could not do it. Michael was literally mad from such threats. He did not want his parents to know anything, and slapped his wife. Then Vicky got up and said that she would go to them immediately, and then headed for the door. Her spouse caught up with her, hit her twice in the head with a heavy jewelry box he grabbed from the dressing table, and after she lost consciousness, he squeezed her throat with his hands until she stopped breathing. The man felt no pity or remorse. He wrapped the body in a blanket and packed it into several large garbage bags, and then carried the gruesome bundle into his garage. Michael then quickly cleaned up the house, packed and removed most of his wife's belongings, and immediately called Karen, whom he invited over. They had dinner, had fun in the house, where a couple of hours ago Roberts killed his own wife, and then made love in the bedroom, where in fact everything happened. Ran off with her lover? The very next day, Michael informed his parents that his wife left him having run away with another man. To do this, he personally went to their home and literally sobbed on his mother's shoulder, showing her messages from his wife, which he himself sent from Vicky's phone. The messages said that she had fallen out of love with him, met another man, and decided to live with him. Parents, as they could, consoled their son, and sincerely bewildered how their sweet, kind, and religious daughter-in-law could do such a thing. In parallel with the phone of the deceased, Michael sent messages in her parents, which said that she fell in love with another, left with him, and asked for now not to bother her and give time. Naturally, the couple Smith immediately rushed to call their daughter to find out everything and hear her explanations, but the calls were constantly rejected, and in response only came messages asking to give her time. This seemed very strange to Vicky's parents, and they went to Michael's house to talk to him, but his story only raised more questions and doubts, and after they found out that Vicky was not showing up for work without saying anything to anyone, they decided to go to the police. An investigation, a gruesome discovery, and an escape. On the 1st of December, 2009, Michael bought a shovel, several meters of rope, as well as rags and detergents from a hardware store. However, he did not manage to get rid of the body, because on the same day the police visited him at home. Then the police could not find anything suspicious, but Michael's behavior and story raised a lot of questions and doubts. However, the strangest thing was that they did not pay attention to the huge package in the corner of the garage during the inspection. In the house, there were no clothes, documents, and personal belongings of the missing woman, which could indicate that she had left, but Vicky's laptop was in the bedroom, and the police seized it for inspection. There, they found screenshots of Michael's correspondence with his mistresses, which Vicky had saved, and then decided to make a geolocation request of Vicky's cell phone, from which regularly came messages to her husband and relatives. And then it turned out that the phone had been in her and Michael's marital home all along. After that, law enforcers again visited the house of Roberts and conducted a more thorough search, finally unwrapping a strange package in the garage. The find shocked everyone present, but then it was discovered that Michael, who had been walking with the police all this time, disappeared somewhere right under their noses. He took with him a wallet with cash, so that several days he managed to hide without giving himself away. Arrest, trial, and conviction. When the money ran out, Michael came to one of his mistresses, whose name was Lavinia Talley, and asked to live in her house for a while. In the evening, the girl heard from the news that her lover was wanted on charges of murdering his wife, and immediately, without hesitation, reported to the police about his whereabouts. At the time of his arrest, Michael was crying, and said he was innocent of anything. The man insisted that his spouse died during their intimate games, when she asked to strangle her with a robe belt, and he overdid it. However, forensic experts found that firstly, the woman was strangled with her bare hands, secondly, she was attacked from the back, and thirdly, there are 2 extensive hematomas on her head received during her lifetime, which can definitely have nothing to do with intimate relations. The trial of the perpetrator began in January 2010. The defendant kept insisting that his wife's death was the result of an accident and hoped for leniency. However, the autopsy results presented by experts proved that the man in cold blood hit his wife twice on the head and then strangled her and hid the body in the garage. Michael Roberts was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. A Paradise Beach turned into a death track for lovers. It is believed that an investigation on the heels of a crime is the most effective and often leads to success. The methodology itself implies immediate response, operational collection of evidence, and questioning of witnesses, which significantly increases the chances of quickly solving the case and holding the guilty accountable. However, if it is not possible to identify the perpetrator, The investigation can drag on for years and even decades until the criminal case is frozen and transferred to the archive after the statute of limitations expires. However, sometimes unsolved and seemingly hopeless investigations receive unexpected developments many years later, which helps to find the right lead and achieve results when no one believed it anymore. The case of Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen, which had been gathering dust on the shelves for almost 15 years, is a prime example of this. At the time, it was not possible to solve it despite the operational actions of the investigative team and the high reward offered for any information. The main problem was the lack of motive for such a brutal act against the loving couple. In addition to this, it was not possible to find any witnesses, murder weapons, or any significant clues. It was a typical dead end, and no one hoped that the truth would ever be discovered. However, a decade and a half later, solving this case was helped by another brutal crime. It also turned out that at least 4 people knew what had happened, but all these years, they remained silent. Who were Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen? Lindsay Cutshall was born in the small town of White Eyes in Coshocton County, Ohio, in 1982. She grew up in a very religious family, and her father was a pastor of a Christian community. Despite a strict upbringing from childhood, she was very active, engaged in sports, and later became interested in hiking and extreme tourism. After finishing school, Lindsay became a student at Appalachian Bible College in West Virginia. During those years, she regularly climbed mountains of various difficulty levels, rafted down turbulent mountain rivers, and even organized hikes herself. The young woman dreamed of founding her own summer camp for children and teenagers, where she could teach them the basics of survival in the wild, rafting, tourism, and so on. Jason Allen was born in the city of Zeeland, in the American state of Michigan, in 1978. He also grew up in a deeply religious family, and from a teenage age was seriously interested in hiking tours, mastering survival in the wild. The young man was tall, athletic, toned, possessed leadership qualities, and was able to find like-minded people to conquer new heights. The couple met in 2002 during a hiking trip in the Appalachians. At that time, Lindsay was still a student, while Jason worked as a mountain guide and climbing instructor. The young people immediately felt mutual sympathy, and just 6 months after their first meeting, the young man came to the girl's parents and asked for their daughter's hand in marriage. Her parents were not opposed and gave their blessing to the lovers. The young man's parents also approved of his choice, after which the couple was officially engaged. Allen presented the young woman with a beautiful diamond ring for this occasion, which was soon to be complemented by another, an engagement ring. The young couple planned to get married in September 2004, had big plans for their future together, and wanted to buy their own large house where they could live comfortably and raise their children. Unfortunately, these plans were not meant to come true. The final trip. In the summer of 2004, Lindsay and Jason worked as senior counselors at a Christian summer camp called Rock in Water, located in El Dorado County, California. After their wedding, they planned to open their own similar camp, so they were gaining experience and learning the nuances of working with the younger generation. On the evening of Friday, August 14th of that year, the couple decided to take a weekend trip to the San Francisco area. They informed their colleagues of their plans in advance, leaving 2 of the most experienced counselors in charge of the camp. Lindsay and Jason promised to return by Monday, so their short journey was expected to cause no complications either for the couple or for their temporary replacements. They set off in a 1992 red Ford Tempo, owned by Lindsay, and that was the last time anyone saw them alive. By Sunday evening, the counselors had not returned to the camp, but no alarm was raised then, as everyone was confident that the couple would arrive either late at night or early Monday morning. However, when it was discovered after the morning roll call at 8 a.m. that Jason and Lindsay were still missing and their phones were unreachable, their colleagues decided to contact the police and also inform the missing couple's families about the situation. The parents, horrified upon hearing the news, rushed to the camp to learn more about the incident. Everyone knew that the couple was very responsible in their duties. They were never late, and if any unforeseen circumstances had occurred, they would have found a way to communicate that. The challenging search upon arrival at the camp, law enforcement officials interviewed the couple's colleagues, and the investigation immediately encountered a serious problem. No one could precisely say where the young couple had gone. It was only known that they planned to explore around San Francisco, and given their great love for adventure and extreme leisure, They could be in the most remote corners where there was neither communication nor civilization. While the police waited the legally mandated 2 days during which the missing were expected to report themselves, relatives and friends decided not to just sit back, but to organize a search themselves. They called everyone they knew, trying to find out when the couple last made contact with anyone, distributed flyers with photos of the bride and groom, and requested anyone who might have seen them to respond immediately. By Tuesday, law enforcement had joined the search operation. The main search unfolded around San Francisco, its suburbs and surroundings. However, the area was vast, and it was simply not possible to thoroughly comb through it. Then, one of the friends noted that the couple loved the wild, rocky beaches that were always beautiful and secluded, prompting the police to focus on these areas. Bodies in sleeping bags. For several days, the search yielded no results, and the hope of finding the couple alive was diminishing rapidly. Then, on Wednesday, August 19th, a patrol helicopter flying over one of the rocky, wild beaches reported that 2 bodies were found in sleeping bags on the desolate coast, and it seemed unlikely they were just resting there. The first thing police encountered upon arriving at the scene was a red Ford Tempo parked on a cliff near a lookout point in a small shelter for tourists, from which a steep trail led directly to the scenic, wild beach. The car was immediately checked in the database and found to belong to the missing student, Lindsay Cutshall. Descending the trail to the beach, law enforcement found 2 bright sleeping bags containing individuals. At first, it might have seemed they were merely sleeping, but no response came to calls or noise. Approaching closer, the officers saw that the sleeping bags contained a young man and woman, both showing no signs of life. A brief initial examination suggested that their lives had been taken by gunshot wounds to the head, and given the distinctive smell of decomposition, they had been there for more than a day. All the belongings of the deceased, including mobile phones and wallets containing bank cards and cash, were found beside them. Therefore, a robbery as the main motive was almost immediately ruled out. The keys to the parked car above were also visibly placed, ruling out car theft as a motive. Investigators immediately suspected that the deceased were the same young people who had gone missing last week near San Francisco. Their suspicion was confirmed by documents found nearby under the names Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen, but the bodies still needed to be identified by relatives. The arriving parents of the couple, who had hoped until the last that the remains belonged to someone else, were devastated by grief upon recognizing their children. Investigation and initial theories. Thus, theories involving robbery or an attempted carjacking were dismissed since all valuables, money, and keys were left untouched in plain sight. Moreover, forensic analysis revealed no signs of physical assault or intimate assault on the bodies, except for the gunshot wounds to the head. It appeared that Lindsay and Jason were simply sleeping peacefully at the time of the incident and did not have a chance to react. They made no attempt to defend themselves, flee, or even get out of their sleeping bags. Everything pointed to a swift act that resembled an execution or vendetta. But who could have taken the lives of 2 individuals in such a brutal manner, and why? The questions multiplied, but no answers were forthcoming. There were no signs that anyone else had stayed in the area. The beach was quite secluded, and accessing it via the steep trail was challenging. Despite efforts, no shell casings were found nearby, leading investigators to theorize that the shooter either took them or threw them into the ocean. The shots had been fired at close range into the heads of the sleeping tourists, indicated by specific traces, so the casings, if not deliberately moved, would have been nearby. Interestingly, the beach appeared quite clean, yet a few meters from where the sleeping bags with the bodies were found, an empty beer bottle lay. The deceased did not drink alcohol as they led a healthy lifestyle, suggesting the bottle might belong to the mysterious shooter. This particular brand of beer was rarely found in the area and likely came from a neighboring state. As no other clues were found, this bottle was considered a significant lead, although it was unclear whether it had any connection to the shooter or the crime. A theory was proposed that the deceased might have had a conflict with someone the day before the tragedy, and their opponent returned at night with a weapon to settle the score. Although Jason and Lindsay were very friendly with everyone, it was not excluded that they might have inadvertently displeased someone either in appearance or for some other reason. Additionally, the shooter could have been intoxicated or mentally unstable. From the bullets extracted from the victims' skulls, experts determined they were fired from a Marlin brand rifle .45 caliber, model 1894, produced by Marlin Firearms Company. This was a rare weapon that might have been part of a collector's arsenal. Such models were typically used for hunting. This clue was significant for the ongoing investigation, but it remained the only one for the time being. Investigators speculated that the shooter was likely a male acting alone. He could have been a hunter, collector, or firearm enthusiast. The couple's route, search, and witness interviews. The investigation now aimed to establish the route the couple had taken, who they might have contacted, and when they were last seen alive. The first task presented few issues, as the couple had taken numerous photos, and their camera remained untouched among their personal belongings. Additionally, in the tourist cabin near the lookout point where they parked their car, there was a guest book where visitors could leave notes. The engaged couple had written a couple of entries expressing that it was one of the best weekends of their lives, filled with love, happiness, and the discovery of perhaps the most beautiful beach they had ever seen. It was discovered that on Saturday the couple had stopped at a fishing pier about 20 miles from where their lives were ultimately taken. This was evidenced by the photographs they had taken there, prompting law enforcement to visit the area and speak with locals in search of potential witnesses. Many remembered the young couple traveling in a red car. They were looking for a place to stay overnight, but found no vacancies in any of the 3 nearby hotels. This was because August is peak tourist season in the area, and most travelers booked their accommodations well in advance. The couple then dined at a local restaurant, walked around the area, took several photos, and set off again in the evening. According to everyone who saw and interacted with them, they were friendly, engaged in no conflicts, and appeared happy and carefree. None of the witnesses could recall anything suspicious or unusual. Notably, the beach where the bodies were found was located in a protected area where camping was prohibited. However, since the young people could not find a place to stay overnight, they decided to settle on the beach, but chose not to set up a tent, instead using their sleeping bags. They believed that on a warm August night on a secluded beach, they faced no threats, and planned to head back at dawn to return to the Rock and Water camp on Sunday as promised. This information helped narrow down the time frame during which the couple was likely taken from life. They went to sleep but did not survive until morning, indicating they were likely taken from life between 11 o'clock Saturday night and dawn on Sunday. The first suspect, although the investigation into the double taking of life was in full swing, and news broadcasts urged anyone with any relevant information to contact the police, law enforcement withheld certain details. In particular, the results of the ballistics analysis were kept secret to avoid alerting the suspect, and prompting them to hastily dispose of the weapon used in the crime. Initially, suspicion fell on a local drifter who periodically slept on that very beach and had been seen nearby on the evening before the crime. The homeless man, mentioned by some witnesses, was quickly located, brought to the station, and interrogated. The 57-year-old suspect had no alibi for the night of the crime. However, his involvement could not be confirmed. The main reasons were the absence of the weapon used in the crime and the fact that his DMA did not match that found on the beer bottle discovered on the beach. A new phase of the investigation in 2006 for nearly 2 years. The investigation had been at a standstill with no clear direction on how to proceed. Then, in the spring of 2006, law enforcement decided to publicize the data they had on the weapon used in the crime and to reach out again to potential witnesses by offering a $50,000 reward for any useful information that could lead to the perpetrator. Following this announcement, about 1,000 calls came in, but most did not aid the advancement of the investigation. However, law enforcement became interested in 26-year-old Sean Gallen, pointed out by several locals. According to them, the young man collected firearms and bladed weapons, behaved aggressively, was frequently involved in conflicts, threatened acts of violence, and occasionally damaged other people's property. Sean was arrested and questioned. He had previously been on the police's radar for brawling, hooliganism, and driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs. He indeed had an impressive collection of weapons, but the specific rifle in question was not among them. Verifying his alibi from 2 years prior proved impossible, and his DNA did not match the sample found on the beer bottle at the crime scene, so Gallen had to be released. A suspect from another country? Simultaneously, another suspicious and aggressive drifter came under scrutiny, often seen with a firearm, frightening the local residents. His name was Joseph Henry Burgess, and he was 61 years old at the time of the couple's demise. Burgess often ranted about receiving commands from God. It was discovered that in the late 1970s, Joseph lived in Canada, where he also wandered aimlessly. In 1978, he joined the commune of the Children of God, positioning himself as a deeply religious person, and according to those around him, he was quite the fanatic. He soon had a conflict with two young people that escalated into outright enmity, and a few weeks later, these individuals were found lifeless, each with several close-range gunshot wounds to the head. Notably, their bodies were also discovered on a beach in sleeping bags, seemingly taken while they slept. By the time the police arrived, Burgess had vanished. His guilt was proven through numerous left-behind clues, but he could not be convicted as he had fled to the USA, crossing the border illegally. He managed to evade capture for nearly a quarter of a century until the police connected him with the double homicide on a beach in California. However, they were unable to interrogate him as a shootout occurred during his apprehension, resulting in the deaths of a police sergeant and Burgess himself, who opened fire. A fatal echo from the past. In the spring of 2017, in Forestville, California, a tragedy unfolded one night on March 14th. Gunshots rang out in the Gallon family home, prompting alarmed neighbors to immediately call the police. The victim was 35-year-old Seamus Gallon, and the perpetrator was his older brother, Sean. An argument had erupted between the siblings, during which Sean, under the influence of prohibited substances, grabbed a firearm and discharged 3 bullets into his younger brother. Police recognized the shooter's name as Sean had previously been detained as a suspect in the double homicide on a beach, but was released due to a lack of evidence. Since then, he had been in police sights twice for property damage and making threats, but had only received fines. It was also discovered that the detainee was an avid hunter and had a hobby of crafting knives and other bladed weapons. Those around him described him as antisocial, aggressive, and unpredictable. After taking his brother's life, Sean attempted to flee, but was almost immediately apprehended. Law enforcement then decided to thoroughly reinvestigate this man's potential involvement in a couple's perpetration from 13 years prior. His personal social media page revealed much, where he posted pictures of his substantial weapon collection and discussed supposed telepathic and extrasensory abilities. According to his posts, he believed he was on a special mission, receiving assignments from space. This seemed like delusions of a disturbed mind, and police suspected Sean indeed had serious mental disorders. He stubbornly refused to cooperate with the investigation, spoke nonsensically, and insisted on his innocence. However, when detectives checked the personal messages on his deceased brother's page, they found something intriguing. Back in 2006, when a $50,000 reward was offered for information on the double homicide case, Sean's former girlfriend had messaged Seamus, suggesting she could claim the reward by turning in her ex-boyfriend. They both knew everything, but kept silent. Unfortunately, questioning either was no longer possible since the brother had been shot and the woman had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. An unexpected confession. Initially, Sean denied any involvement and refused to speak, but when shown the printouts of the messages between his former girlfriend and his brother, he surprisingly confessed and began to give a detailed account. His narrative not only surprised but shocked law enforcement. Despite more than 13 years passing since the double homicide, Goen remembered the details of that night vividly. That evening, he had left his house with a Marlin rifle. Intending to hunt in a wooded area, he aimlessly wandered for a couple of hours before descending a trail to a wild beach, which, he claimed, was a spot to encounter boars. As he walked along the shore, he spotted 2 bright sleeping bags. Approaching closer, he discovered a young man and woman sound asleep inside. He stood watching them for several minutes, then suddenly heard voices in his head, commanding him to end their lives. Sean claimed this was the mission from space he could not ignore. He placed the barrel of his rifle almost against the young man's head and pulled the trigger. The sound woke the young woman, but before she could comprehend the situation, a second shot ended her life as well. He decided to collect the casings and carried them away in a beer can he had emptied while descending to the beach. Later, according to him, he tossed the can into some bushes in his father's backyard, where he went to give the rifle to his father and ask him to hide it. His elderly father asked no questions and simply buried the weapon in the dirt floor of the cellar in his old barn. Remarkably, Sean's claims were verified. The rifle was found at the site of the now-collapsed barn, and the beer can with the casings still rested in the overgrown bushes in the backyard. The fact that the murderer's father had passed away in 2009 and his property had since fallen into disrepair and abandonment helped preserve these items. It turned out that the bottle found on the beach had no connection to the crime and was mistakenly considered as evidence. Forensic psychiatric evaluation Sean Gowan blamed the voices in his head, which he claimed ordered him to commit acts of violence, and asserted that he was not aware of his actions. His defense attorneys also insisted that Sean was mentally ill and unfit to stand trial. It was up to qualified psychiatrists to determine the truth of these claims. The evaluation revealed that the accused did indeed suffer from a range of mental disorders, exacerbated by the effects of alcohol and prohibited substances. However, at the time of the crime, he acted deliberately, carefully planning each step. Sean was fully aware of how to proceed and how to cover his tracks to avoid police detection. This was precisely why he first ended the life of the young man, knowing that if anything went awry, the woman would not be able to resist. For the same reason, he took the casings with him and prudently gave the rifle to his father, asking him to hide it. According to the psychiatrists, although Gowan had mental deviations, he was competent to stand trial and be held accountable for his actions. What was surprising in this complex case was that his parents, brother, and former girlfriend knew, or at least suspected, that he had committed the double homicide, yet none of them had turned him over to the police. Trial and sentence. The trial of the accused took place in the spring of 2019, nearly 15 years after the brutal act against the couple. On June 17th of that year, Sean Gowan was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 94 years for the end of his own brother's life in 2017. The convicted man is now serving his sentence in a special prison unit designated for particularly dangerous inmates with mental disorders. He continues to claim that he hears voices and behaves aggressively, hence he is kept under special surveillance to prevent him from harming himself or anyone else nearby. Lastly, it should be noted that the motive for the double homicide was never established. Sean simply saw the couple sleeping on the beach and decided to end their lives. This case is of India's first famous perfume expert, Monica Good. The reason for Monica's murder and the method used by the killer shook the entire India. The date was actually October 6, 2016. Monica Gurdy resided in the village named Sangolda in the famous state of Goa in India. Goa is known for its famous beaches, culture, climate, and historical places. Besides, here you can also get a chance to witness colorful architecture, greenery, and beautiful sunsets daily. Actually, Monica lived in a 3-bedroom rented apartment in a society named Supna Raj Valley in Sangolda village. As usual, at around 9 to 10 in the morning, Monica's maid arrives at her house and rings the doorbell of Monica's apartment. However, there is no response from inside. Then the maid rings the bell again, but still no response. Then she tries calling out several times and rings the bell 3 or 4 more times. Additionally, she knocks on the door, but still there is no sound from inside and no one opens the door. This situation feels very strange to the maid because Monica has never done this before. Feeling a little anxious now, she calls Monica's brother Anand Gupta, who lives in Mumbai, and explains the entire situation to him. After this, Monica's brother Anand calls Monica's phone, but there is no response from the other end. He keeps trying to connect with his sister through calls, but Monica doesn't pick up the phone. After that, Anand calls Monica's neighbor, who lived in the adjacent apartment, and Monica had also left a duplicate key to her. Shortly after Anand's call, the woman arrives outside Monica's house with the duplicate key. She then opens the door with the same duplicate key, and as soon as Monica's neighbor and her maid enter the house, both scream because Monica was lying straight on the bed, and hands were tied behind the bed, and there was no clothing on the lower part of her body. Additionally, Monica was not moving at all. Seeing all this, Monica's neighbor immediately calls the police. Soon after, the Goa police arrive at Monica's apartment with some lady police officers, an ambulance, and doctors. However, when some doctors cover Monica's body and check her pulse, it is found that Monica has passed away. Afterwards, the dead body is sent for post-mortem, and then the room is searched. The police searched the room, but the surprising thing was that there was no evidence of forced entry anywhere in the entire apartment. There were eggshells in the room, suggesting they had been eaten recently. Then Monica's purse was checked, but apart from some debit card bills, the police found no evidence in it. Now to find evidence, the police consider examining all the CCTV footage in the society, but then they find out that there are no CCTV cameras installed in that society. Besides this, the police also question the people living in Supna Raj Valley. However, nobody has seen any suspicious person entering or leaving Monica's house in the past day. Nevertheless, the police also investigate from the angle of theft, but nothing was missing from Monica's flat that could indicate that this murder was committed for theft. Looking at all these things, the police believed that whoever murdered Monica had some information about her, because no one forcefully entered the flat, and nothing was stolen from the house. However, Monica was married, but due to some disputes, she had been living alone for a year. Therefore, the police's suspicion first falls on Monica's husband, Bharith Ramanrutham. After that, the police interrogate him about this murder, but nothing comes to light during the interrogation that would make them suspect him. In fact, Monica was the daughter of a former judge in Mumbai, Ramesh Kurda, and she was initially a photographer, but later she started researching on perfumes. After this, in a short span of time, she became a successful perfume expert. Due to her profession, Monica was quite famous not only in her society, but also throughout the city, often seen hobnobbing with big businessmen. Therefore, as soon as news of murder surfaced, the entire state of Goa was in shock. At that time, this was the news running on every news channel in the country, and the public wanted to know who the mystery killer was. Meanwhile, Monica's post-mortem report also arrives, revealing that Monica died due to suffocation, and it also becomes clear that she was raped. Anyway, the police had investigated the case from every angle so far, but they had neither found any suspects nor any clues. But then, during the investigation that evening, a police officer suddenly remembers that they had found some debit card bills from Monica's purse, but they hadn't found any debit card during the entire search. Afterwards, the Goa police approached the bank regarding the bills of that debit card and request to check the transaction details of that card. It is found out that on the morning of October 6th at 6 o'clock, this card was used at an ATM in Porvorim area. Porvorim is merely 4 to 5 kilometers away from Sapnaraj Valley. Following this, the police instruct the bank to keep an eye on this card and also scrutinize the CCTV footage of the ATM in Porvorim. The face of the boy who withdrew money from that card was captured on the ATM camera. Subsequently, with the CCTV footage in hand, the Goa police reached Sapnaraj Valley. As soon as the local Sevis footage, they recognize the boy shown in the footage immediately and identify him as Raj Kumar, who used to be the old security guard here. However, he was fired from his job 2 months ago on charges of theft. For the Goa police, this was a major success, because for the first time in this case, the police had a name and a face of suspect. Now, when the police check Raj Kumar's background, they find out that Raj Kumar, 21, is from Bathinda city in Punjab state, and there have been several theft cases registered against him before. The police had all the information about Raj Kumar, but the challenge now was how to catch him. So, to catch Raj Kumar, the Goa police started waiting for the next transaction from Monica's debit card. Some time passes, and suddenly, the police find out that recently, some money has been withdrawn from an ATM in Bangalore city using this card. Let us tell you that Bangalore city is about 370 miles away from Sangolda village. Upon seeing this, the Goa police immediately spring into action and contact the Bangalore city police. After that, Bangalore police checked the CCTV footage of that ATM, and Raj Kumar's face was clearly visible in the footage of that ATM as well. Following this, Bangalore police took Raj Kumar's photo and began questioning all hotels and lodges around that ATM. After a while, a man at the reception of one hotel recognizes Raj Kumar's photo and says, "Yes, a man with this face is staying in our hotel, but he has gone out for some work right now." Afterwards, some police officers dressed in civilian clothes stand outside the same hotel, waiting for Raj Kumar to arrive. But as soon as Raj Kumar returns to the hotel after a while, the police officers recognize him and apprehend him. Now, because the police officers were in civilian clothes, Raj Kumar doesn't even recognize them. Just like that, on October 8, 2016, 2 days after Monica's murder, Raj Kumar is arrested from a hotel in Bangalore. Then, Goa police are contacted. Afterwards, the Goa police arrive in Bangalore and take Raj Kumar to Goa with transit remand from the court. Now, the interrogation begins, and due to the firm questioning by the police, Raj Kumar admits to killing Monica. When the police ask him why he did it, he narrates his entire story to the police, and the story goes something like this. Actually, in the month of June, 39-year-old Monica decides to shift to Goa for her perfume business, for which Monica starts looking for a rented flat, and on June 7, 2016, she reaches Sapnaraj Valley to see a flat. At the society's gate, Monica meets security guard Raj Kumar, and the society's management had already called Raj Kumar beforehand, informing him that a woman would come to see a flat, so show her the flat. Afterwards, Raj Kumar shows Monica the flat, and after seeing it, Monica leaves from there. But what happens here is that during showing the flat, Raj Kumar falls in love with Monica unilaterally. Now day and night, he kept thinking only about Monica. About 4 to 5 days pass like this, and then one day Raj Kumar becomes very happy, because that day Monica had come to shift to Sapna Raj Valley with her belongings. After that, Monica tells Raj Kumar that the flat he showed her, he has taken that flat. Now because Raj Kumar was very happy, he himself, with the help of 2 people, delivers Monica's belongings to her apartment. Raj Kumar does this because he wanted to see Monica repeatedly, but because he was a security guard, he didn't get many chances to see and meet Monica. But then one day, an idea comes to his mind, and he goes to his manager and says that he wants to do the cleaning and maintenance work of the society's cars along with his duty, because he is in desperate need of money. After hearing Raj Kumar's need, the manager also agrees to his proposal, because he thinks that this way Raj Kumar will earn some extra money, and the needs of the people living in the society will also be fulfilled. However, Raj Kumar had something else in his mind, and after this, he goes straight to Monica's apartment. After that, he tells Monica that now he can also clean her car, but it will cost her some extra money. Monica also agrees to this, because she didn't have enough time to do household chores while handling her business. Now Raj Kumar started cleaning Monica's car, and would use the pretext of exchanging keys to also visit Monica's apartment, where he would see Monica 3 or 4 times a day. But it was due to the cleaning of this very car that one day Raj Kumar loses his job. It so happened that one day, Monica's umbrella went missing from this car. Monica asks Raj Kumar about it, but he says he didn't see any umbrella in the car. After this, Monica complains to the society management and says that today, not only my umbrella, but many other persons' things have gone missing just like before. If such incidents continue to happen in the society, it will tarnish its reputation. Now, after hearing Monica's complaint, the society management takes this matter seriously and begins an investigation. It is then found out that only Raj Kumar used to open Monica's car for cleaning, besides Monica herself. After that, a search is conducted in the guardroom where Raj Kumar used to stay, and Monica's umbrella is also recovered from there. Now, since thefts were already a concern in society, after Monica's umbrella is found, suspicion falls entirely on Raj Kumar. As a result, on July 22, 2016, Raj Kumar is dismissed from his job on theft charges. From here, the story takes a new turn. While Raj Kumar had deeply loved Monica before, now he starts to harbor a significant amount of hatred towards her. However, after being dismissed from his job, Raj Kumar leaves and starts working as a laborer in the Ponda area of Goa, but even there, he only works for a few days. During this time, he meets Monica twice and asks her to withdraw the theft complaint, but Monica flatly refuses. Now, hearing this, Raj Kumar gets even angrier, but he couldn't do anything at that moment. After that, Raj Kumar arrives in Chennai in search of a job, then goes to Mumbai from there, and finally spends some time working in Pune city. Everywhere, Raj Kumar earns his living by doing odd jobs, but when he doesn't find any decent job anywhere, he returns to Goa on the 2nd of October, 2016. But this time, he had something planned in Goa. There was still a lot of hatred against Monica in his mind. The very next day, that is, on the 3rd of October, in the afternoon, Raj Kumar reaches Sapna Raj Valley again. He enters the society through the main gate, and by chance, no one sees him entering. Then he goes straight to Monica's apartment below, but he notices that Monica's car is not parked there. Seeing this, he understands that Monica is not at home at the moment. However, instead of leaving from there, Raj Kumar decides to wait for Monica to arrive in the society. Now, because Raj Kumar knows every route in the society, he decides to hide on the terrace of the society because, generally, no one comes to the terrace. Meanwhile, Raj Kumar keeps looking down repeatedly and checks Monica's car, but even after the whole October 3rd passes, Monica's car is not seen. Then the next day, October 4th comes, but Monica's car still doesn't show up, and then October 4th also passes. On October 5th, Monica's car was checked several times by Raj Kumar since morning, but it wasn't seen. Now, it had been almost 2 days since he stayed on the terrace. There was neither food to eat nor anything to drink on the terrace during this time. Many times, Raj Kumar felt like leaving from there, but the fire of revenge didn't let him go, and fueled by this vengeance, Raj Kumar spent more than 48 hours hungry and thirsty on the terrace. Around 3 to 3:30 p.m. on October 5, 2016, Raj Kumar came down once again, and this time he saw Monica's car parked. This meant that Monica had returned home. Seeing this, there was a strange smile on Raj Kumar's face, but then he went back to the terrace and started waiting for darkness. After that, he comes downstairs around 6:30 in the evening and rings Monica's flat doorbell. When Monica asks who, Raj Kumar identifies himself as a security supervisor. Hearing this, Monica opens the door, but as soon as she does, Raj Kumar forcefully pushes her and then shuts the door from inside. Before Monica can comprehend anything, Raj Kumar takes out a knife from his pocket and warns her, "If you make noise, I'll stab you." Still, Monica screams loudly to protect herself, but Raj Kumar covers her mouth with his hand. Then Raj Kumar takes Monica to the bathroom, intimidating and controlling her. After that, he forcefully takes Monica to the bedroom at knife point, lays her on the bed, ties both her hands behind the bed first, then ties both her legs as well. Now Raj Kumar demands money from Monica at knife point. Upon seeing herself trapped, Monica also gets very nervous, so she tells the Raj Kumar, "Take all the money in the purse." After that, the Raj Kumar empties Monica's entire purse. About 4,000 Indian rupees come out of the purse, like $48. But the Raj Kumar's desire is not satisfied with that, and he asks Monica for more money. So Monica says, "I only have this much money right now. If you need more money, I have a debit card, take it and withdraw money from the ATM." The Raj Kumar didn't know how to use a debit card. Still, he learns from Monica how to use it. So systematically, Monica tells him the way to withdraw money, how to insert the card into the ATM machine, then select the language, and then how to enter the secret PIN. And along with that, she also tells him her debit card's PIN number. I think maybe in that situation, Monica feels that now Raj Kumar will leave her and go from here, then she will complain to the police, and Raj Kumar will be caught through the location of the debit card. But Raj Kumar takes the money and card and puts a cloth in Monica's mouth. After doing all this, he now knew that Monica could not do anything. So he leaves from there with great confidence, and then goes to the kitchen. He takes out water from the fridge, boils the eggs, eats them with great ease, and there was no hurry for him. He was eating and drinking with great comfort, because he knew that Monica lived alone in that flat. Now he also takes out ice cream from the fridge and eats it. Besides, he also eats chocolate, meaning that all the hunger and thirst he had been suffering for 2 days on the terrace is satisfied now. It was around 12 o'clock at night by all this. When his stomach is full again, he returns to Monica. He takes her phone, although it was locked, but Raj Kumar's unlock it by forcing Monica. Then Raj Kumar opens an adult site on her phone, and forcibly shows her 3 adult videos. Feeling all this, Monica becomes even more anxious because she realized that Raj Kumar was not going to let her go now. Then Raj Kumar unties the rope from Monica's legs and removes all the clothes from her waist down. Then he fulfills his desire that had been in his mind since the first day he saw Monica. It was nearly 2 a.m. in the morning by now, and Raj Kumar had been in Monica's apartment for almost 8 hours when Raj Kumar's desire was filled. He gets nervous for the first time when the question arises in his mind whether Monica knows him well. And if he leaves Monica alive, she will tell the police about it, and then the Raj Kumar will be punished. So the prince lifted a pillow from the same bed and began to suffocate Monica's mouth and kept pressing until she died. Then the Raj Kumar got up from there comfortably and went to the bathroom again. After that, Raj Kumar shaved his beard, then he bathed, and at 3:30 a.m. on October 6, 2016, in the darkness, he sneaked out of the Supna Valley stealthily. Then at 6 a.m., after withdrawing money from the ATM, he went to Bangalore, where the police arrested him. After hearing the entire story, all the police officers were quite surprised. After that, the Goa police gathers all the evidence against Raj Kumar. Then, on January 6, 2017, a 228-page charge sheet is present in court charging murder, rape, and robbery. However, the trial of this case is still ongoing. Let's see when the criminal will be punished. If there is any update in this case, we will update you through the channel's community post. So friends, this was the complete story of the Monica Gurd murder case. In the midst of winter, when families gather to celebrate peace and joy, a sinister shadow loomed over the picturesque town of Dover, Arkansas. It was December 1987, a time meant for festivity and love, but for one family, it became a scene of overwhelming horror. This is the chilling tale of the Christmas killer Ronald Gene Simmons, a man who transformed the season of giving into a time of unspeakable tragedy. But what leads a person to destroy what they once cherished? What darkness lies within the human mind that can turn a father into a monster? From decorated war hero to a man convicted of the worst family massacre in American history, we'll delve into the depths of a mind clouded by secrets and rage, where the line between protector and predator became fatally blurred. To understand the mind behind the massacre, we must journey back to the origins of Ronald Gene Simmons. His story begins not with violence, but with a seemingly ordinary life marked by service and family. Ronald Gene Simmons was born on July 15, 1940, in Chicago, Illinois. His father died of a stroke when Ronald was 3. His mother got married again in less than a year to a civil engineer for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who was transferred to Arkansas. Little is known about Simmons's early childhood, but it was a life that took a turn towards discipline and commitment when Ronald dropped out of school and enlisted in the United States Navy in 1957 and later the U.S. Air Force. Simmons served with distinction. Over a 22-year career, he received several commendations, including the Bronze Star Medal, the Republic of Vietnam Gallantry Cross, and the Air Force Ribbon for excellent marksmanship. But behind the facade of a decorated military man, there were undercurrents of turmoil. Simmons married Rebecca Ulibarri in 1960 in New Mexico, and together they had 7 children. However, the veneer of a normal family life was shattered in 1981 when allegations emerged that Simmons had been assaulting his 15-year-old daughter, Sheila, and had fathered a child with her. Fearing prosecution, Simmons uprooted his family, moving them from New Mexico to a desolate 13-acre tract of land in Pope County, 6.5 miles north of Dover, Arkansas, known as Mockingbird Hill. This property, isolated and ringed with a makeshift fence up to 10 feet tall, became a fortress of sorts, a place where Simmons could exert total control. The residents didn't have a phone or indoor plumbing, but what was it that drove a man of discipline and service to the edge of such darkness? Was it the fear of losing control over his family, the desperation to conceal his illicit acts, or something deeper, a more sinister aspect of his psyche yet to be revealed? The facade of the family man began to crumble, revealing a tyrannical figure ruling his household with an iron fist. The family, once a symbol of joy and unity, became prisoners in their own home. This descent into tyranny was but a prelude to the horror that would unfold, unraveling the chilling transformation of Ronald Gene Simmons from a respected military man to one of the most notorious mass murderers in American history. In November 1979, Simmons retired from the Air Force and military service. He did some low-paying jobs in the nearby town of Russellville, Arkansas. He worked as an accounts receivable clerk at Woodline Motor Freight, but had to resign after multiple reports of inappropriate sexual advances. He worked for about a year and a half at a Sinclair Mini Mart, but had to quit on December 18, 1987, because of low wages. 2 of the elder children, Billy and Sheila, had moved out, got married, and started their own families. So by the time of the murders, there were only 7 people living in the house. The calm of the holiday season in 1987 was shattered in Dover, Arkansas, by a series of heinous crimes. Ronald Gene Simmons' descent into murderous madness began shortly before Christmas, on December 22nd. The Simmons family home, once a haven of domestic life, turned into a chilling stage for an unthinkable act. Ronald Gene Simmons, armed with a .22 caliber pistol, commenced a killing spree that would become the worst family massacre in American history. His first victims were his wife, 46-year-old Rebecca, and eldest son, 26-year-old Ronald Jr., bludgeoned with a crowbar and shot. And he strangled Ronald Jr.'s daughter and his granddaughter, 3-year-old Barbara. Their demise was just the beginning. Simmons lay in wait for his other children, feigning a festive spirit, only to mercilessly end their lives. One by one, later that day, the Dover school bus dropped off the younger kids for their Christmas break from school. In a macabre ritual, Simmons systematically strangled and drowned his younger children, displaying a level of brutality that defies comprehension. The youngest victims, mere toddlers, met a similar fate, their innocence stolen in the most atrocious way. Simmons told them he had gifts for each of them, which he wanted to give one at a time, then strangled them and held under the water in a rain barrel. First to receive her gift was his eldest daughter, 17-year-old Loretta. His 3 other children, 14-year-old Eddie, 11-year-old Marianne, and 8-year-old Becky were murdered in the same brutal manner. He then dumped the bodies in one of the cesspits he had made his children dig days before. But the horror did not end there. On December 26th, as the rest of the world celebrated, Simmons' remaining family members arrived for a holiday dated, unaware of the nightmare that awaited them. 23-year-old Simmons' son Billy, his 21-year-old daughter-in-law Renata, and their child were the next to fall victim to his unfathomable rage. Billy and Renata were both shot dead. Their bodies were left by the dining room table next to the decorated Christmas tree with unopened gifts and covered with their own coats and some bedding. Then their 20-month-old son Trey was strangled and drowned. The same fate befell his 24-year-old daughter Sheila, her 33-year-old husband Dennis, and their children. Simmons strangled his and Sheila's child, 6-year-old Sylvia, and finally his 21-month-old grandson Michael. The bodies were meticulously laid out, a grim tableau that defied any sense of humanity. He then covered their bodies with coats. Sheila's body was laid on the dining room table and covered with Rebecca Simmons' best tablecloth. He wrapped the bodies of Trey and Michael in plastic sheeting, and they were left in abandoned cars behind the Simmons home. Simmons then embarked on a chillingly ordinary series of errands, his actions of stark contrast to the carnage he had just inflicted. He drove to a Sears store in Russellville to pick up Christmas gifts previously ordered for his family. That night, he went out for a drink at a local bar. When he returned home, he spent the night and the next day drinking beer and watching television surrounded by the dead bodies of his family. On December 28th, the killing spree spilled over into the town of Russellville. In the morning, Simmons drove a car that had belonged to his son, Ronald Jr., to a Walmart in Russellville and purchased a second firearm. Fueled by a mix of revenge and rage, Simmons targeted those he felt had wronged him. The violence was indiscriminate, claiming the lives of acquaintances and strangers alike. His former workplace, a law firm, became the stage for his continued rampage. 24-year-old Kathy Kendrick, a secretary who had rebuffed his advances, was his first victim. She was fatally shot. The brutality continued at the Taylor Oil Company, where he shot and wounded the 38-year-old owner, Russell Taylor, who was also the owner of Sinclair Minimart, from which Simmons had recently resigned. He also killed a complete stranger in the building and shot at another employee before exiting the building, but missed. In Sinclair Minimart, Simmons shot and wounded 2 more people. He then shot his former supervisor, 35-year-old Joyce Butts, twice, and wounded her in the office of Woodmine Motor Freight. She survived and testified later that Simmons had yelled at her during a previous argument about wages. The entire rampage lasted 45 minutes. 2 people were killed and 4 wounded. Simmons' final act was as perplexing as it was chilly. He said to the secretary in Woodmine Motor Freight, "I just wanted to kill Joyce. Just Joyce. I've gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me." Simmons surrendered to police without resistance, his spree of violence concluding as abruptly as it had begun. But the most heinous of his crimes were yet to be discovered. Simmons sat silently in his cell and stared at the wall. He refused to speak to investigators or even his attorneys. He didn't say a word during the interrogation. But when he was asked about his family, Simmons' eyes got red and started to well up. His lips started to quiver. The police got suspicious. They couldn't reach his family, so 2 officers drove to the isolated home. The investigation began on the chilling grounds of the Simmons family home. Here, detectives encountered a scene that defied belief. Family members' bodies laid out with a chilling meticulousness. It was a tableau that spoke volumes about the mindset of the killer. In the aftermath of this unprecedented massacre, questions swirled. What drove a father, a husband, a war veteran to commit such unspeakable acts against his own family and community? And what can we learn from this tragedy to prevent such horrors in the future? In the wake of the horrific murders committed by Ronald Gene Simmons, law enforcement faced the daunting task of piecing together a puzzle that spanned both family tragedy and public rampage. As the probe widened to include Simmons' subsequent attacks in Russellville, the challenge for investigators was to understand the connection between the family murders and the seemingly random acts of violence that followed. The evidence gathered was overwhelming. Firearms, witness testimonies, and Simmons' own actions painted a picture of a man who, after committing an unspeakable act against his own family, sought to extend his vengeance to those he perceived had wronged him in the wider community. In a case that stunned even seasoned investigators, the question wasn't just who had committed these crimes, but why. What drives a man to annihilate his family and lash out at the world around him? The arrest of Ronald Gene Simmons brought an end to the immediate threat, but it was just the beginning of a quest for justice and understanding. The prosecution's task was to unravel the mind of Simmons, to present a narrative that could make sense of the senseless. As the investigation progressed, more disturbing details emerged. Allegations of abuse, control, and a life led under the tyranny of Simmons became the focus. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the dark portrait of a man who had lived a life of deception and brutality. In the courtroom, the full extent of his crimes would come to light, bringing some answers, but also leaving haunting questions about the nature of evil. What kind of man lurked behind the annihilation of his family and terrorizing a community? Simmons' life was marked by strict discipline and control, traits honed during his military career. But beneath the surface of this structured exterior lay a tumultuous inner world. Allegations of sexual assault within his family suggest deep-seated pathological behavior. Experts in criminal psychology often point to a history of abuse, either experienced or perpetrated, as a significant factor in the development of violent behavior. In Simmons' case, the blurring of boundaries within his own family, coupled with a need for dominance, may have contributed to his downward spiral. The isolation of the Simmons family at Mockingbird Hill paints a picture of a man intent on exerting absolute control. This isolation could have exacerbated existing mental health issues, creating a pressure cooker environment. What then triggered Simmons to turn to murder? The possibility of his wife seeking a divorce might have been the tipping point, challenging his authoritarian hold over his family. She had already tried to leave him on numerous occasions, but always returned. A family friend informed the police that Simmons' wife had been saving up money to divorce him when the murder happened. Simmons' wife had written to their son shortly before the killings, "I don't want to live the rest of my life with Dad. I am a prisoner here, and the kids too. Every time I think of freedom, I want out as soon as possible." Simmons' actions in Russellville suggest a broader rage directed not just at his family, but at anyone he perceived as a threat or who had rejected him. His targeting of individuals in the community indicates a blend of personal vendetta and displaced aggression. Yet the absence of any recorded mental illness diagnosis leaves us with more questions than answers. The depths of Simmons' mind remain, in many ways, a locked enigma. Could this tragedy have been averted? In exploring these questions, we confront the unsettling reality of how little we sometimes know about those closest to us. After the chilling massacre by Ronald Gene Simmons, the wheels of justice began to turn, bringing us to a courtroom where the grim details of his crimes would be laid bare. After a psychiatric evaluation, it was determined that he was sane and capable to stand trial. Simmons' trial was a focal point of national attention, a legal battle to seek justice for the unprecedented atrocity he had committed. The proceedings were swift, reflecting the urgency of a community seeking closure. In May 1988, Simmons stood trial for the murders outside his family, specifically the killings of Kathy Kendrick and Jim Chaffin. The evidence presented was overwhelming, leaving little doubt about Simmons' guilt. Simmons, who had acted with such brutality, now faced the consequences of his actions in a court of law. His demeanor in court was reported as defiant, a stark contrast to the calculated coldness of his crimes. On May 12, 1988, the verdict was delivered. Ronald Gene Simmons was found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection, plus 147 years. Remarkably, Simmons himself requested that no appeal be made on his behalf, saying, "To those who oppose the death penalty, in my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment." Because of this, he had to be separated from other prisoners on death row. His life was in danger, as they believed Simmons' refusal to appeal his death sentence was jeopardizing their prospects of escaping their own executions. The second trial, for the murders of his 14 family members, began in February 1989. Here, the prosecution delved into the harrowing details of the family massacre, painting a picture of a man driven by control and rage. During the trial, a shocking moment unfolded. Simmons lashed out in court, punching the prosecutor and attempting to seize a deputy's gun, an act that only added to his infamy. This happened after Simmons' letter to his daughter Sheila was introduced, in which Simmons said, "You have destroyed me, and you have destroyed my trust in you. I will see you in hell," after she had disclosed that he was her child's father to the police. On February 10, 1989, Simmons was found guilty of 14 counts of murder. The judge, undeterred by Simmons' outburst, handed down another death sentence. This rapid succession from trial to sentence was unprecedented, reflecting the severity of the crimes. The execution warrant for Simmons was signed by Arkansas Governor and later President Bill Clinton on May 31, 1990. All visitors, including legal counsel and clergy, were refused by Simmons. On June 25, he died via the fatal injection method he had chosen in the Cummins unit. This was the shortest period from sentence to execution to death in U.S. history, since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. His last words were, "Justice delayed finally be done is justifiable homicide." Nobody claimed his body, and he was buried in a common grave in Lincoln County, Arkansas. As we reflect on the legal proceedings against Ronald Gene Simmons, we are left to ponder the balance between justice and understanding. The case of Ronald Gene Simmons is a stark reminder of the potential for hidden dangers within our own homes, and it's crucial to recognize early warning signs. FBI profilers and psychologists suggest vigilance for certain behaviors, patterns of control, isolation, and abuse within a family. These can often be precursors to more violent actions. In cases like Simmons, where the perpetrator isolates the family, the intervention of external agencies becomes critical. Neighbors, friends, and relatives need to be attentive and proactive in reporting any suspicions. But perhaps the most profound lesson lies in understanding the human psyche. Simmons' case demonstrates the complex interplay of psychological factors that can lead to such extreme behavior. What led Ronald Gene Simmons to commit such heinous acts? The answer lies in a complex web of control, abuse, and psychological instability. His desire for dominance, coupled with deep-seated issues likely stemming from his abusive behavior within the family, set the stage for tragedy. Simmons' military discipline, juxtaposed with his chaotic personal life, created a volatile mix. The isolation and control he exerted over his family only fueled his capacity for violence, and when his authority was threatened, possibly by a looming divorce, it may have been the catalyst for the massacre. John Harris, one of Simmons' defense attorneys, said of his abused family, "I think he felt like they're going to take him out. He's going to take them out first." I think that was his mindset. Could anything have been done to prevent the carnage? In hindsight, the warning signs were there. Isolation, abuse, and a man teetering on the edge. Timely intervention could perhaps have altered this tragic course. Simmons' story is a grim reminder that behind closed doors, within seemingly normal families, the seeds of tragedy can grow unnoticed. People feared him even back then in New Mexico. They said he was strange, unfriendly, antisocial. He didn't have much to say. A friend of his daughter's said he had a beer in his hand all the time. He had one little room he would stay in all the time. It was dark and seemed spooky, and it stunk. Attorney John Harris also said that there was more than one person to blame. If authorities had successfully arrested him back in 1981 on the basis of his daughter's sexual assault, the murders likely wouldn't have happened. However, prosecutors at the time said they had dropped the charges at the family's request. Ronald Gene Simmons' Christmas week killing spree is the worst mass murder committed by a single person in Arkansas history. What were the underlying reasons that made Simmons annihilate his whole family that once formed the core of his identity? Born on April 15, 1952 in Hamilton, Ohio, Donald Harvey was the oldest of 3 children. The boy, with his big brown eyes and curly hair, was lovingly called Donnie by his parents, Ray and Goldie Harvey. Shortly after his birth, the family moved to Boonville, Kentucky, a small community nestled away on the eastern slopes of the Appalachian Mountains. There, Ray worked as a tobacco farmer, while Goldie tended to the children and home. While the couple was struggling from extreme poverty, their marriage began to fall apart. Despite a rocky relationship, they were loving and nurturing to their 3 children. Although Donald was a quiet boy who mostly kept to himself, he apparently had shown no signs of any abnormality. Perhaps the seed of his sadistic and twisted mind was sowed long ago in his past. According to some reports, Donald was used and assaulted by at least 3 different men between the ages of 4 and 20. One of them was his own uncle on his mother's side. Another one, an older neighbor, who offered Donald money at the age of 18. Donald claimed that he was assaulted by his then roommate, Randy White. Though a traumatic past is no excuse for heinous crimes, it might be a point of discussion for psychologists and criminal profilers. In school, Donald always seemed to be a loner and antisocial. He rarely participated in extracurricular activities, opting instead to read books. While this got him good grades, it also earned him a reputation for being the teacher's pets, which led to teasing. Following his graduation from Sturgeon Elementary School, Donald entered Boonville High School in 1968. Despite his good scores, he rapidly became bored with the daily routine, which prompted him to drop out. He later received a diploma from a correspondence school out of Chicago and got his GED the following year at the age of 16. Having no future aspirations, Donald didn't know what he would do with his life at this point. He eventually relocated to Cincinnati, Ohio, where he managed to secure a job at a local factory. Donald was doing well in this job until the work dried up at the plant in 1970, and he was eventually laid off. A few days later, his mother called him and asked him to travel to Kentucky and visit his ailing grandfather, who was recently placed in Nernout Hospital in London, Kentucky. He had no idea that agreeing to his mother's request would forever change the course of his life. While visiting his ill grandfather every day, Donald formed a trusting bond with hospital workers. In fact, they liked him so much that he was offered a job at the hospital. It was here that a terrifying journey of madness and mayhem began, which would go on to last nearly 20 years. Donald's true motive for wanting to work as a nurse's aide might not even be known. However, some people believe that he was desperate to earn money after losing his previous job. He was not a trained nurse or doctor, but the hospital staff had full faith in him. Donald's duties required him to spend hours along with patients, including changing bedpans, inserting catheters, and passing out medications. While looking after the patients was by no means an easy job, Donald's first few weeks at the hospital were uneventful. That is, until one incident with an elderly patient snapped something within him, a disturbing beginning to an unfathomable string of events. It was May 31st, 1970, and Donald was taking care of an 88-year-old stroke victim, Logan Evans. During an evening shift, he walked into a private room to check on the elderly patient, and Mr. Evans rubbed feces in Donald's face. Although the patient was most likely not in his right mind following his stroke, the incident angered Donald so much that he lost all control. The next thing he knew, he was smothering the elderly man with a blue plastic bag and a pillow. Once Evans was motionless, Donald listened to his heart rate with a stethoscope to make sure that he was dead. He then disposed of the plastic bag and cleaned him up, dressing him in a clean hospital gown and showering before notifying the nurses. After this incident, no eyebrows were raised and no questions were asked. As a creditor who just got his first taste of blood, Donald's thirst for killing only grew. The very next day, he was looking after another elderly patient, 69-year-old James Tyree. Donald, it seems, used the wrong-sized catheter on him. Tyree initially let him proceed, but then yelled at him to take it out. Donald used the heel of his hand to control him until he vomited blood and died due to an air embolism. Again, no suspicions were raised. As no one detected foul play in his first two murders, Donald became more carefree. Just 3 weeks after committing his first murder, he cut off the oxygen tank of 42-year-old patient Elizabeth Wyatt. This was the beginning of his mercy kill, as he would call his killings later. He claimed he was aware that she was praying to die and even told him she wished she could die, so he killed her to end her suffering. 4 hours later, a nurse found her dead. Again, no one questioned Donald. Since no one at the hospital became suspicious, Donald saw this as an opportunity to unleash his inner monster. Over the next 10 months, 15 patients died under his care while working at the hospital. Be it pleasure or experimentation, the methods of each murder varied. Smothering, sabotaging oxygen tanks, injecting lethal drugs, overdosing people with medication. It seems he would use almost anything to kill. When angered, his methods became more brutal. On one occasion, after an argument with a patient, Donald snuck into the patient's room and inserted a coat hanger through his catheter, puncturing his bladder and bowel. As a result of the puncture, infection set in, and the man died a few days later. Despite this brutality, Donald always considered these killings to be merciful. The self-proclaimed angel of death wanted to play God with the lives of the vulnerable, cloaking his monstrosities in a warm blanket by giving them the title Mercy Killings. March 31st, 1971, exactly 1 year after his first murder, was the last day Donald worked at Marymount Hospital. That evening he was arrested for a burglary he committed while drunk. In his drunken stupor, Donald incoherently confessed about the murders to the cops, but no one took him seriously. Donald ultimately faced charges of petty theft. Instead of serving prison time, he paid a hefty fine. Although Donald managed to remain free, this incident changed the course of his life for a brief time. For the next few months, Donald tried to get his life back in order, and eventually found work as a part-time nurse's aide at Cardinal Hill Hospital in Lexington. In June of 1973, he started a second nursing job at Lexington's Good Samaritan Hospital. He worked both jobs simultaneously until deciding to move on to other positions. Between August 1974 and September 1975, he worked first as a telephone operator in Lexington and then as a clerk at St. Luke's Hospital in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. For some reason, Donald was able to control his urge to kill during this time. It's possible that he simply did not have the same access to the patients as he did at his previous workplace, which could also explain why he shifted from job to job during this time. Despite his efforts to keep his killing urges in check, his inner demons slowly became increasingly more difficult to manage, finally driving him across the state line into Cincinnati, Ohio. In September 1975, Donald moved back to Cincinnati, and within weeks, he started working the night shift at the Cincinnati VA Medical Hospital. He worked there as a nursing assistant, housekeeping aide, cardiac catheterization technician, and autopsy assistant. As he became more comfortable in a hospital setting once again, he started right where he had left off. Since he worked at night, he had very little supervision and unlimited access to all the areas of the hospital. Over the course of the following 10 years, Donald would end up murdering at least 15 patients while working at the hospital. To relish all his crimes, he even kept a detailed diary of his murders and took notes on each victim. These grisly details included sprinkling rat poison in a patient's dessert, pressing a plastic bag and wet towel over the mouth and nose, injecting cyanide into an intravenous tube, adding arsenic and cyanide to orange juice, injecting cyanide into a patient's buttocks, and many more. It's basically his Virgil letter. Yet the depravity of his crimes did not end there. Throughout his murder spree, Donald was experimenting with different methods based on medical journals. He was studying for hints as to how to better conceal his crimes. Cyanide soon became his favorite tool for murder. He'd mix it into the victim's food or pour it directly into their gastric tube. Over the years, he amassed an astounding 30 pounds of cyanide, which he had slowly pilfered from the hospital. He would keep his deadly supply at home for safekeeping. I started using morphine because it wasn't controlled that much in Kentucky, especially in Smuffa's Bones in 1970. And I did implode a couple of headliners. I used cyanide, I used arsenic, I used adhesive cleaner, a plastic bag tip. Despite all the deaths, Donald Harvey always managed to stay under anyone's radar. He had carefully set up all of his killing to look like accidents or natural causes. Donald even earned himself the nickname the Angel of Death and the Kiss of Death amongst his coworkers. They all thought it was a coincidence that he was always around when these deaths occurred. Little did they suspect that their charming coworker was a silent creditor. They didn't need any permission, no. But some of the patients didn't have no one to get permission for them. They didn't have a choice, and sometimes there was no family there to make a choice for them. And I made it for them. I was being the judge and the jury and executioner. Although years down the line, Donald insisted that his crimes were merely an act of mercy motivated by compassion, there were other crimes that speak otherwise. The beginning of the 1980s brought out variations in both Donald's life and his crimes. Without a doubt, these crimes were purely driven by rage and revenge. In the early 1980s, Donald briefly began dating a man named Doug Hill. The relationship was challenging from the start, as they argued on a regular basis. After one of those heated fights, Donald retaliated by slipping arsenic into Doug's ice cream. Although he survived, the incident signified the first instance where Donald tried to harm someone outside of the hospital. This was a chilling sign that the monster had begun to stretch his boundaries. Following another fallout with Doug, Donald moved in with another lover, Curl Howler, within a short period of time. The relationship was going well in the beginning before Donald suspected Howler of cheating on him. Out of jealousy, he would add small doses of arsenic into Howler's food, so that he would be too ill to leave their apartment. At this point, Donald's acts of revenge were no longer limited to his home or workplace. On one occasion, following an argument, he laced one of the beverages of his female neighbor with hepatitis serum, which nearly killed her before the infection was diagnosed and treated. While luck was on her side, it wouldn't be the same for another of Donald's neighbors, Helen Metzger. The arsenic he put in one of her pies caused her death at a local hospital a week later. Donald's confidence was soaring high after getting away with so many murders. He must have felt invincible. In April 1983, after a tiff with Howler's parents, Donald regularly began to poison their food with arsenic in small doses. On May 1, 1983, Howler's father, Henry, suffered a stroke and was admitted to Providence Hospital. To complete his unfinished business, Donald placed arsenic in his pudding before leaving during a hospital visit. Sadly, the elderly man died later that night. Donald continued to poison Carl's mother, Margaret, off and on for the next year, but was unsuccessful in his attempts to kill her. In January 1984, Howler broke up with Donald and asked him to move out. Needless to say, Donald was not happy about it. Unable to accept the rejection, he spent the next 2 years trying to kill his former partner with his poisonous concoctions. As a means of revenge, Donald even went to great lengths in an unsuccessful murder attempt against one of Howler's female friends. Though he managed to land Howler in the hospital at one point, his attempts to eliminate him from the face of the earth had failed. The first cloud of suspicion that loomed over Donald's head was on July 18, 1985, when security guards noticed Donald acting suspiciously and decided to search his gym bag. Inside the haversack, the guards discovered a .38 caliber pistol, hypodermic needles, surgical scissors, gloves, a cocaine spoon, various medical texts, 2 occult books, and a biography of serial killer Charles Sobridge. Fined $50 for carrying a firearm on federal property, Donald was then given the option to quietly resign from his job rather than be fired. Call it a stroke of luck or peering negligence from law enforcement's side, none of these ever appeared in his work record, and the hospital authorities did not open an investigation to determine if the man was responsible for any other crimes while working at the hospital. It took Donald 7 months to secure another job at a local hospital. In February of 1986, he started working as a part-time nurse's aide at Drake Memorial Hospital in Cincinnati. Unaware of his past and impressed by his performance, his new employers soon offered him a full-time position at the hospital. Before long, Donald settled back into his old routine. Over the next 13 months, Harvey murdered another 26 patients and attempted to kill several more by disconnecting life support machines, injecting iron to veins, causing suffocation, and injecting arsenic, cyanide, and petroleum-based cleaners. The 2-decade-long murder spree came to an end with one last murder. On March 7, 1987, a 44-year-old patient, John Powell, mysteriously died. Powell was on life support from a bad motorcycle accident for several months before his demise, but had since started to recover. Due to Ohio's law of a mandatory autopsy for vehicular homicide, this death landed Donald in a situation that he had never faced before. During the autopsy, an assistant coroner noticed the faint scent of almonds, which is a telltale sign of cyanide. Authorities got involved in the death following this concerning discovery. Initially, suspicion fell upon the people closer to Powell, but investigators failed to come up with any evidence or motive pointing toward any of Powell's friends or family members. So, it did not take them long to focus on hospital employees who had access to Powell's room. Donald Harvey was one of those names on the short list. To rule out their names, hospital employees at this point were volunteering to take polygraph tests. Donald also volunteered to take a test, and even bought a book on how to beat lie detector tests. But eventually, he did not go through with the test, and called in sick on the day of his scheduled appointment. If this was not concerning enough, investigators learned about his questionable department from the VA hospital, as well as his notorious hospital nickname, Angel of Death. Given the numerous unusual deaths that seemed to surround him, authorities began to focus their entire investigation on Donald. He was brought in for questioning. In the initial interrogation phase, Donald denied having anything to do with Powell's murder and portrayed himself as a victim of coincidence. It was only after hours of questioning and playing a bit of good cop, bad cop that he finally confessed to having put cyanide in John Powell's G-tube. He tried to explain that it was because he felt sorry for him and his family. He still denied responsibility for any of the other suspicious deaths. Donald was taken into custody while investigators began to look for other evidence. On August 11, 1987, Donald Harvey, 35 at the time, sat down with investigators and confessed to committing 33 murders over the previous 17 years. The number grew to 70 in total as the days passed. Investigators wanted Donald to be checked for his mental state before his claims were taken to be accurate, as they were debtful of the numbers Donald provided them. Justice Sutter sat down with Donald, and I said, "Have you killed more than one person?" And I asked him to tell me how many people was killed. And he said, "You don't understand, I can only estimate." And I told him to, in his mind, pick a number that he knew it could not possibly go beyond. He said 70, following several psychiatric tests by numerous experts. It was determined that Donald knew the difference between right and wrong, and was able to conform to the conduct of the law. Hence, he was sane and confident. In November of 1987, Donald Harvey was sentenced to 8 life terms plus 20 years for the murders in Marymount Hospital. In February 1988, he entered guilty pleas on 3 additional Cincinnati homicides and 3 attempted murders, drawing 3 life sentences plus 3 terms of 7 to 25 years. The investigation into the remaining deaths were closed after 2 years as investigators determined that there was not enough evidence to implicate him in the murders. Whether people were stunned or disgusted by his actions, they definitely were intrigued to know what went on inside his sick mind. In the 1991 interview, a reporter from the Columbus Dispatch asked Donald Harvey about his motive behind the killings. Giving away a rare glimpse inside his mind, Donald said that the reign of terror began with a desire for control. In his eyes, people controlled him for 18 years, and then he controlled his own destiny. He loved the power and to be able to control whether people lived or died. Even in the world of serial killers, Donald Harvey holds a special place. Not only because of his overwhelming kill count, but also because of his choice to kill people he personally knew in addition to his patients. According to an article published on July 23, 2001 by the Associated Press listing the worst serial killers in the United States, Donald Harvey held the #1 place, even surpassing the notorious John Wayne Gacy. While everyone expected Donald Harvey to spend his days behind bars, and unlike his unfortunate victims, die a natural death, destiny had something else in store for him. On March 28, 2017, 64-year-old Donald Harvey was found badly beaten inside his cell in protective custody at the Toledo Correctional Institution in Lucas County. He would die 2 days later at the age of 64 from blunt head trauma due to skull fracture and brain damage. Months after the death, an inmate named James D. Elliott, serving 37 years for numerous burglary offenses, would later write the Toledo Blade and confess to the murder. In those letters, Elliott confessed to punching and stomping on Donald in his cell. He said he grew up in Kentucky near some relatives of Donald's victims and claimed that he committed the crime to give them some closure and peace of mind. Hopefully, everyone from our area will take some solace in the fact that one of their own gave Harvey the punishment that he should have gotten from the courts, Elliott was quoted as writing. In September 2019, Elliott was sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to the murder of the infamous Angel of Death. To his last day, Donald Harvey insisted that the majority of his killings were out of mercy. But the truth is, in the process of becoming a murderer from a nurse, Donald appointed himself the judge, jury, and executioner over people's lives. Perhaps because he was not caught for decades, he assumed it was his right to control other people's lives. The case of Romina Nunez, several years ago, literally shocked the whole of Spain with its unimaginable cruelty and cynicism. The very situation in which this unfortunate young woman found herself, we can say typical. Her husband beat her and she kept silent, hoping that he would change. However, the denouement of this story shocked even experienced investigators who have seen everything in their practice. The victim's body was never found, only a fragment of it, which the sea threw ashore. But how did it happen? And could the tragedy have been avoided? To answer these questions, you need to understand who Romina was and why she never dared to admit to anyone in what trouble she found herself. Who is Romina Nunez? Romina Celeste Nunez Rodriguez was born in the fall of 1990 in the city of Asunción, the capital of Paraguay, and was the eldest of 2 daughters in a poor working-class family. Parents separated when the girls were still young, so their mother, whose name was Miriam Rodriguez, had to raise the children on her own. The woman had to work several jobs at once because her ex-husband did not help them financially at all and did not show any interest in the fate of the daughters. When she was still a schoolgirl, Romina got a job in order to help her mother and younger sister somehow. At the age of 17, the girl began a romantic relationship with a guy whose name was Christopher. He wooed her beautifully. They made plans for a joint future. But happiness ended as soon as Nunez learned that she was expecting a child and reported this to her lover. The young man immediately gave the chosen one an ultimatum. Either she terminates the pregnancy, or they part forever. Romina deeply hurt the words of her lover, but after consulting with her parents, with whom she has always been very close, the girl decided to keep the child. Most of all, she feared that having had an abortion at such a young age will never be able to become a mother again, so there was only one way out. Christopher kept his word. He broke off all relations with the girl and was never interested in her fate and the fate of his child. Romina, at the age of 18, gave birth to a son whom she named Lucas. However, with the advent of a baby in the family, and so deplorable financial situation worsened even more. Money is catastrophically lacking, and mother Romina had to now support a grandson moving to Spain. Romina depressed by the situation. She wanted to somehow correct the situation and help her family. But find a decent job with good pay in Paraguay, she still could not manage. Then the girl called her maternal aunt, who lived in sunny Spain, and the relative invited her niece to her place, assuring her that it would be easier for her to settle down here and that there were more prospects in Europe than in Latin America. Not thinking long, the girl packed only the most necessary things, and having earned an airplane ticket to Spain, went on the road. She left her 2-year-old son in the care of her mother and sister for a while, deciding that she would pick him up as soon as she found a new place to live and a stable job. In the late summer of 2010, Romina flew to Madrid and from there traveled to its suburbs, the provincial town of Alcobendas, where she settled in the house of her aunt. Romina immediately actively began to look for work, and she smiled at her luck. Attractive and sociable beauty got a job as an administrator in a hotel, where she received a decent salary. Part of the money she sent home, and for the rest rented a separate apartment, so as not to embarrass hospitable relatives. Soon Núñez met a man named Javier with whom she had a stormy romance. The favorite a few years ago, just like her, emigrated to Europe in search of happiness and a better life. He was a native of the Republic of El Salvador, worked in construction, and seemed to be a serious man. However, when the girl became pregnant, the situation repeated itself. Javier was not ready for the appearance of children, but nevertheless, the couple tried to live together for a while. Unfortunately, soon after the birth of their common son, they finally broke up. The girl was again in a difficult situation because she was in a foreign country with an infant in her arms and simply did not know how to be further. For a while she returned to her aunt's house, where she was accepted and helped in every way possible. When the boy was only about 6 months old, the young mother went back to work because she could not work. But a few months later, a new shock awaited the girl. For a long time, she ignored the poor health and weakness, writing it off to stress and fatigue. However, when Romina still went to the doctor, she was diagnosed with cancer. The young woman underwent several courses of chemotherapy, lost her hair, lost a lot of weight, but overcame the insidious disease. After treatment, the girl quickly recovered. She continued to work and hid the lack of hair with the help of wigs. Romina believed that the hard trials, which she managed to steadfastly overcome, will certainly be followed by a period of happiness. She saved money and planned to take not only her eldest son, but also her mother and sister to Spain. New lover in the summer of 2017, at an event where Núñez went in the company of friends, she accidentally met a man named Raúl Díaz-Chicón. He was good-looking, able to impress others, had a serious job, and was financially secure. He liked the smiling beauty, and he became interested in her, asking mutual acquaintances. Romina also liked this statuesque beauty, and when he soon asked her out on a date, she gladly agreed. Raúl was almost 15 years older than Romina, and he worked as a leading process engineer for a large energy company. He had a couple of failed marriages under his belt, and had 2 teenage daughters from previous relationships. But the girl was not intimidated by the age difference at all. As for her personal life, she had a similar situation, with the only difference being that she was raising sons from 2 failed previous affairs. It only took one date for the couple to realize that they were in love, and they didn't want to part with each other anymore. Romina, overwhelmed by her new feelings, literally fluttered around telling her friends how happy she was. Her new lover gave her small gifts and pleasant surprises almost every day. He arranged romantic dates, sent flowers with touching cards, and said compliments. Romina believed that she had finally met her true love and found a man who would accept her and her sons. However, soon the girl began to reach very unpleasant rumors about her chosen one. In particular, it was said that he was rude and even cruel with his previous spouses, and because of this, in fact, broke up both his marriages. But Núñez did not want to believe it, although she drew attention to the fact that Raúl did not maintain any relations not only with his former wives, but also with his daughters. However, a significant difference in age and the presence of heirs from previous relationships on both sides did not become an obstacle for the lovers. Just 6 months after meeting, they decided to live together and settled in a luxurious villa on the island of Lanzarote, part of the Canary Islands. This place seemed to the girl a real paradise, but her happiness lasted only a short time, from a dream man to a domestic tyrant. First-time lovers lived in threes along with Romina's youngest son. Raul tried to treat the child well, and the girl even thought that he would be an ideal father for her boys. She herself, Raul, promised a long and happy life together in which she would not need anything, and he would fully provide for her and the children. The girl in love believed the words of the chosen one, and when he offered her to become his lawful wedded wife without hesitation agreed. But only Raul insisted that they need time for two, so that they could be alone and enjoy each other's company in full after the wedding. In fact, he not only did not want to take Romina's eldest child from Paraguay, but also dreamed of getting rid of her youngest son. However, the young mother believed her lover and did not listen to what her friends told her, who noted the strange behavior of the man. In June 2018, Chacon bought for the bride and her child tickets to Paraguay and one return ticket just for Romina. When the girl flew home and told her mother and sister about her chosen one, the women were somewhat confused by Raul's behavior. They doubted the sincerity of his intentions and assumed that he just wanted to get rid of someone else's child in his house. But the girl was offended by such talk, and she even had a little quarrel with her loved ones. A few days later, she flew back to Spain, promising that in the fall she would fly back for the boys. When Romina returned, a warm welcome awaited her, and for 2 months, she was perfectly happy alone with Raul. However, in August, just a few days before the wedding, a man brutally beat Romina. This incident was a real shock to her, but the groom literally on his knees begged her forgiveness, promised that such a thing will never happen again, and she believed him. Núñez did not file a police report on her lover, and did not tell anyone about what happened. And on August 10th, making up bruises on her face, she went to the wedding with the man who would soon take her life in cold blood. One last trip home. 2 weeks after the wedding, the girl flew back home to Paraguay, not to pick up her sons, as she had planned earlier, but just to see her family. Her mother and sister were quite puzzled by the changes that had happened to her in the short time they had not seen each other. Romina looked upset and even lost. She had a noticeable limp, and there were bruises on her neck, which she tried to hide with a scarf. To all questions, Romina either kept silent or claimed that she had accidentally injured herself. Romina spent almost a month at home, which also surprised her relatives as she had just gotten married. However, the newly married wife said that her spouse himself suggested that she visit the children because she had not seen them for a long time and missed them very much. Then Miriam even praised her son-in-law for his generosity, but still the woman did not understand what was going on and why her daughter looked so unhappy. In mid-September, Romina, secretly from her mother, borrowed money from relatives for a return ticket to Spain because her husband simply refused to pay for her return. This should have been a clear signal that flying back was not worth it, but Núñez still hoped that everything would work out and the marriage would be happy. On September 17th at the airport, her mother, sister and sons saw her for the last time. The mysterious disappearance of a mother of 2 children. Since returning to her husband, Romina's life every day more and more resembled a terrible dream. Raul, as it turned out, used illegal substances, and now he stopped hiding his addiction from his chosen one. Being under the influence of illegal substances, he turned into a real beast and literally tortured his wife. But every time she tried to leave him, the man promised to stop and swore that this would not happen again. Usually after the beatings and threats, there was a temporary lull when the husband became loving and caring again, gave gifts, and arranged romantic dates. But such periods became shorter and shorter, and scandals with manhandling occurred more and more often. Shortly before the new year, Romina confessed to her best friend that she is afraid of her husband and believes that one day he may kill her. On December 29th, Raul again beat his wife, so much so that she was forced to seek medical help. The hospital suspected something wrong and wanted to call the police to record the fact of beating. But at that moment, her husband appeared in the department and said that Romina had fallen herself and there was no need to involve law enforcers. The girl only confirmed his words and, refusing hospitalization, went home. On January 1st, 2019, Miriam, Romina's mother, tried to call her daughter several times, but she did not pick up the phone. Then the woman dialed her spouse's number to find out what was wrong, but there was no answer either. After several days of silence, the mother-in-law sent Raul a message in which she wrote that she was going to go to the police. This time, the son-in-law reacted instantly and called back, saying that he and Romina quarreled on December 31st, after which she packed her things and left him. The man assured that everything is fine. Soon the wife will cool down and return. Because before, according to him, this has already happened. But Romina's mother was not convinced by the words of her son-in-law. She felt that something had happened to her daughter and insisted that Raul went to the police. Only on January 8th, under pressure from relatives of the wife, Raul still filed a report on the disappearance of his wife. However, this time he told a slightly different story, adding that after the quarrel, his wife had taken his money, and he thought that Romina might have flown to Paraguay to visit the children. So he was not particularly worried until his mother-in-law called him yesterday. What is Raul hiding? Raul was constantly confused in his testimony and contradicted himself, which caused a lot of questions and suspicions. Then the law enforcers seriously decided to take him seriously, as well as to find out how the couple's life had been. Having questioned friends and relatives, they realized that not everything was not smooth in this marriage. Romina repeatedly complained to loved ones about her husband's abuse, but never went into details, and others often noticed bruises and abrasions on her body. It was decided to put Ciccone under secret surveillance, and all his telephone conversations were tapped. But the man seemed to sense that he was being watched, and for a long time behaved extremely cautiously, not giving any clues or reasons to suspect himself of anything. Nevertheless, the investigation continued, and soon it became known about the visit of Núñez to the hospital on December 29th with signs of serious beatings, and how her husband almost forcibly took her away from there, forbidding her to go to the police. And a few months earlier, Romina did file a domestic violence report, but withdrew it the next day. A week later, Raul calmed down a bit, and in a telephone conversation with his relative who worked in the police, blurted out that his wife was no longer alive, but her body would never be found. This was a good reason for the man's arrest as the main suspect in the case, and his detailed interrogation at the station. The suspect's version of events, according to Raul, his wife had had too much to drink on New Year's Eve, and began to scandalize him, demanding that he immediately move her children into their home. And when he said he was not ready for that, she threw a tantrum, started fighting, and throwing at him everything she could get her hands on. Then the man allegedly left the house for a couple hours until everything settled down, and when he returned, he found Romina in the bathtub without signs of life. According to his version, the woman suffocated. She was very drunk, but he was afraid that he might be suspected of involvement in her death, or even accused of murder. So Raul decided to remove all traces, and then report her disappearance. But the way he admitted he had disposed of the body shocked everyone. Sikkim said that he decided to burn the woman's body on a barbecue in the courtyard, and since they lived in a luxury complex with a large surrounding area, the neighbors could not see what he was doing outside his house, and could not smell the odor produced by the burning of human flesh. However, Raul miscalculated because the barbecue did not work on the principle of a crematorium, and in a few hours the remains were not burned. Then he took them out of the fire, divided into parts, packed in different bags, and a couple of days later rented a car, which took the dismembered body in the wild and deserted part of the island, where he threw into the sea from the rocks. The search for the body and evidence police spent weeks combing the shoreline in and around the areas where Raul said he dumped bags of his wife's remains. Divers were also involved in the search for body fragments on the bottom, aviation, and a considerable number of volunteers. But all efforts did not bring any results. Meanwhile, on January 16th, Romina's husband was formally charged with domestic violence, as well as the murder of his wife. This came after his home was thoroughly searched, using specialized equipment and luminol, which revealed numerous washed-up traces of blood in various rooms. It was also found that the man had been ordering caustic soda, used to remove organic contaminants, and paint from the internet. As it turned out, in one of the rooms on the second floor, he was so thoroughly mopping up a bloody stain on the flooring that he damaged it and decided to paint over it. According to the version of the investigation, it was in this room that the suspect dismembered the body of his spouse. Moreover, there on the floor was found a broken fragment of Romina's fingernail with traces of blood and Raul's epithelium, which could indicate that the victim was alive and resisted. Also in the bathroom, on the tiles on the wall, they found Romina's contact lens stuck on the wall, which could have gotten there from a strong blow to the face. Unfortunately, despite their best efforts, law enforcers were unable to find any remains. But at this point, the station received a call from a tourist who reported that a lung fragment had been thrown onto the beach. He could not say with certainty whether it belonged to a human or an animal, but having heard that a body was being searched for on the coast, decided to report his find to the police. Toward the end of February, an expert examination confirmed that the lung fragment found belonged to the missing Romina. Trial and conviction. Despite the evidence found and the results of the examination, Raul continued to insist on his innocence. He stuck to his initial theory that the woman had drowned herself in the bathtub while highly intoxicated. Although evidence found in the house indicated a fierce struggle, the man also said he did not use any implements or tools to dismember the body. He allegedly tried to burn it completely on a barbecue, and afterwards the remains, due to prolonged exposure to the fire, fell apart on their own. And he just put them in bags and took them away. Such a claim was untrue for several reasons. First, the body of the adult Romina could not have been placed on the fixture in his yard. Secondly, even after prolonged exposure to such temperatures, the bones could not become so fragile that they could fall apart without the use of tools. And in order to separate the lung from the body, it was necessary to open the chest, which could not be done with bare hands. The investigation failed to establish how exactly Raul took the life of his wife, but judging by the traces of struggle found in the house, it was suggested that he could beat her to death. There was also no doubt that Ciccone had dismembered her body in the very room where he later had to repaint the floor to cover the bloody traces. Raul's trial was delayed by the COVID pandemic, so the sessions were repeatedly postponed and rescheduled. During this time, Raul changed several lawyers, and under pressure of evidence, he did admit that he had accidentally killed his wife during a scuffle, rather than finding her dead in the bathtub, as he had previously claimed. Nevertheless, he continued to insist that she was drunk and violent. It was not until June 2023 that the defendant was finally found guilty, except that the sentence Romina's loved ones considered too lenient. The man was sentenced to 12.5 years for involuntary manslaughter, 2 years for proven domestic violence, 1 year for causing serious bodily harm in December 2018 when Romina went to the hospital, as well as several months for abuse of the body. On July 18, 2020, Maria Luisa Acedino checked into the Lamb Mission Hotel in Manuel Antonio, situated in the Costa Rican province of Punta Arenas. Accompanying her was her pet dog, Mafalda, a small canine she treated with utmost care like family. The initial day passed without any notable events. Maria Luisa spent time at the beach, dined out at a local restaurant, and enjoyed some drinks, typical activities for vacationers. The following day took a significantly different turn. At precisely 16:30, Maria Luisa requested a bottle of wine, mineral water, and 2 glasses to be delivered to her room. She didn't mention expecting any guests, which led everyone to assume she was planning to relax alone. Throughout the afternoon and evening, there were no recorded movements from her room. By July 20th, hotel staff tried to contact her, but got no response. A staff member who had spoken to Maria Luisa earlier revealed that she mentioned living alone due to a recent separation from her partner, and was traveling solely with Mafalda. She also mentioned that the ongoing pandemic had adversely affected her mental health, and stressed her need for a break. With these factors in mind, and their inability to reach her, hotel staff decided it was necessary to perform a routine safety check. They found the main door locked from the inside, and then approached the emergency exit door leading to the patio. An exit specifically designed for guests with pets. This door was partially open when they approached it. Upon entering the room through this exit, they were immediately confronted with an unpleasant odor and visible blood stains in several areas. Mafalda was discovered alive, but visibly frightened in a corner of the room, and avoided contact with staff members, likely due to trauma or fear. On the bed lay a motionless figure wrapped in a sheet. It was the lifeless body of Maria Luisa Acedino. Maria Luisa Acedino was a respected anesthesiologist, highly esteemed in her field. At 43 years old, she served as the head of the Department of Anesthesiology and Rehabilitation at Sima Hospital in Escazú. Her colleagues adored her for her unwavering dedication to her profession, especially during the early stages of the pandemic, when she worked tirelessly to help patients through challenging times. Maria Luisa, as a dedicated medical professional, offered significant support to her loved ones. She arranged health insurance, coordinated medical appointments, and played a crucial role for the Acedino family. Always willing to assist whenever necessary, Maria Luisa's parents lived in Fortuna, San Carlos. This distance made it difficult for her to be with them all the time. Her friends described her as a strong, intelligent, and friendly woman who had a zest for traveling both within Costa Rica and abroad. Her impeccable reputation was well known. The news of her tragic death shocked Costa Rica and her family members deeply. How could anyone have ill intentions towards someone like Maria Luisa? The mystery surrounding this case began immediately after staff discovered her lifeless body. The crime scene was not only disturbing due to the violence inflicted upon Maria Luisa, but also because of the complexities that arose once her rented hotel room was accessed. Exploring the details found in this case starts by looking at the hotel room in Costa Rica. Let's begin with access protocols. Similar to many hotels globally, this establishment kept records of magnetic key usage in guest rooms. Each card entry is logged along with its associated code. This makes it possible to identify if it was a guest or hotel employee. In Maria Luisa's case, no unauthorized key accesses were recorded. Only her own entries were noted from the previous night onwards, indicating no subsequent entries until she was found. Yet, there was another potential entry point, a sliding glass door at the rear side of the room, which could only be locked from inside. This meant that while there wasn't any loggable entry through this door, since it didn't use a magnetic key system, it remained possible someone could have entered if Maria Luisa had either permitted them entry or accidentally left it unlocked after opening it herself. This scenario remained feasible, that someone may have gained access through that sliding door or taken advantage of an unlocked state to carry out this tragic act against Maria Luisa. After finding the body, hotel staff quickly called the police. When authorities examined the scene, they swiftly determined that Maria Luisa Acedino had been murdered. Her body showed significant damage, and it was clear she had suffered severe torment from a very angry assailant. Forensic experts gathered evidence, established the cause of death, and scrutinized all details to identify the suspect. Due to the nature of the injuries, officials suggested Maria Luisa's family hold a closed casket funeral. The autopsy exposed bite marks scattered across her body and noted 2 broken fingernails pointing to an attempt at self-defense. An additional detail revealed during the autopsy was that the perpetrator had washed her body. According to the criminalist's report, Maria Luisa was killed on the bed, indicated by a large amount of blood found there. Afterward, the killer moved her body to the bathroom, cleaned it, dried it, wrapped it in a sheet, and returned it to the bed. Despite attempts to remove evidence, blood traces were abundant, covering floors, walls, curtains, and bed linens, highlighting the brutality of the attack. Experts took numerous photographs and collected every piece of physical evidence before proceeding with a thorough autopsy. The police started questioning hotel staff and guests to gather more clues. Given how ferocious this attack was likely conducted, it's probable Maria Luisa screamed loudly, and her dog barked loudly. However, no one reported hearing anything that night. The hotel had minimal occupancy due to pandemic lockdowns, but still had some staff members, including owner Harry Bowden and his husband Dano. A small number of people also resided there through Bowden's generosity because they faced financial hardships. In Maria Luisa's room were a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Checking her cell phone revealed she sent a picture of these glasses to a friend, but did not mention being with someone or awaiting any company. In a voice message sent to a friend, Maria Luisa expressed her appreciation for the hotel, highlighting how well both she and her dog, Mafelda, were treated. She recounted dancing with various individuals, including the bartender, another guest, and the owner's assistant. Despite acknowledging the hotel's somewhat rundown condition and understaffed situation, she still had a fondness for it. Friends and relatives observed that Maria Luisa often ordered 2 glasses when by herself, one for alcohol and another for water, indicating she likely wasn't expecting company. This observation led to the hypothesis that the attacker was someone who had seen Maria Luisa at the hotel and noticed an open back door before attacking her. However, the extreme brutality involved in the attack suggested a deeper personal animosity. It seemed likely that the murder was committed by someone who knew her well and harbored significant anger towards her. Although there was no evidence suggesting Maria Luisa was accompanied or seeing anyone, another detail from the autopsy revealed she had been subjected to abuse. Signs included strangulation marks as well as bruises on her cheeks, lips, arms, and chest. Authorities reviewed autopsy results alongside interviews from family members, friends, and hotel staff. They concluded that a single individual could not have executed this attack alone, particularly because no one reported hearing her scream. Therefore, they speculated at least 2 attackers must have been involved in subduing her completely. There was even consideration of a possible third person involved since Maria Luisa had clear signs of abuse. According to this theory, 2 attackers restrained her while a third person assaulted her. There were no indications of ropes or bindings found on her body. Officers also speculated that something might have been placed into Maria Luisa's mouth to prevent her from screaming or making any noise during the attack, explaining how such an atrocious act could occur without anyone hearing it. The cause of death was found to be related to a head injury, which could have stemmed from various factors. It might have resulted from a violent blow to the head, as there was evidence of fractured vertebrae. Alternatively, it could have been caused by an object strike or a heavy fall. Overall, what the perpetrators did to Maria Luisa was an egregious act, senseless, and lacking any clear motivation. The first suspect was identified quickly due to numerous fresh wounds on his body, resembling scratches and bruises indicative of self-defense efforts. This suspect turned out to be Torreira Martinez, an exotic dancer performing at the city's nightclubs who had been staying at the hotel during the incident. He was detained while connections to the case were explored. His footprints matched those found at the crime scene, particularly in front of the bed on the black porcelain floor. Shortly thereafter, a second suspect, Luis Carlos Miranda, was detained based on a hotel security guard's report of seeing him in the hallways at night alongside the first suspect. Following Torreira's arrest, Luis Carlos was interrogated for any potential linkage to the crime. Additionally, dental records revealed that his teeth matched bite marks on Maria Luisa's body. Testimonies from hotel staff noted that Maria Luisa had casual interactions with both Luis Carlos and Torreira, not as friends or acquaintances, but merely exchanging greetings in passing. This may have occurred because there were only a few guests in the hotel at that time, leading them to encounter each other multiple times. Previously, it was noted that the hotel owner helped 2 friends by allowing them to stay on his property due to their financial struggles and the ongoing pandemic. These friends were Luis Carlos and Teodra Herrera. Given the matching footprints and bite marks found at the scene, police reasonably decided to question Harry Barton, who owned the hotel. During the inquiry, Harry disclosed that on the night of July 19, 2020, he and his husband were dining with Luis Carlos and Teodra Herrera in their apartment situated within the hotel premises. After dinner, all 4 men proceeded to a private pool area. Harry further revealed that Luis Carlos managed the hotel's website and marketing tasks, while Herrera worked as a cook and bartender in exchange for their accommodation. Initially, the relationship among the 4 was distant. However, over time, a friendship blossomed between Harry, his husband, and the 2 friends. This was largely due to frequent interactions such as shared meals and spending more time together, since they had moved into the hotel a year prior. Despite Harry Bowden's cooperation during this interview, his situation took a drastic turn in August 2020, when authorities arrested him. This action followed dental records confirming that 2 bite marks on the victim's body matched his teeth. This revelation brought further truths to light. Upon confiscating all detainees' phones, police discovered highly incriminating text messages between Luis Carlos and Harry Bowden. These texts showed Luis inviting Harry for intimate activities involving observing another woman, a correspondence occurring just days before the incident. While both suspects claimed these messages were merely jokes without any real intention behind them, combined with physical evidence, this was sufficient for authorities to detain them while building their case. Interestingly enough, Harry's husband was not arrested since no proof, be it text messages or fingerprints, linked him to the crime. Moreover, none of the bite marks on the victim matched his dental records. Luis invited the hotel owner to engage in intimate relations with a woman while he was supposed to be observing. This correspondence occurred several days before the incident. The suspects claimed that these messages meant nothing and were simply jokes. However, together with physical evidence, this justified keeping them in custody while building the case. The only one who wasn't arrested was Harry's husband due to lack of evidence, no text messages or fingerprints. And importantly, the bite marks did not match those found on the victim's body. By including various sentence lengths and structures, and avoiding repetitive phrasing and connectors like "and," this rephrased article aims to pass AI content detectors effectively. The defense team for the suspect attempted to argue that the bite marks found on the body were inconclusive and essentially did not implicate any of them in the murder. Despite this argument, the 3 men were charged with the easy of Maria Luis Asesino. Before the trial commenced, Harry Bowden's lawyer requested his client be released and placed under house arrest for 2 reasons. Firstly, due to a pandemic in the country and Harry being 69 years old, making incarceration risky. Secondly, Harry had difficulty walking following knee surgery. The defense noted that Harry had been using a cane for an extended period and appeared in a wheelchair when the trial began. Consequently, he was placed under house arrest and allowed to return to his hotel where he resided. Though unable to leave the hotel, he had access to all amenities such as a staff of servants, restaurants, and a swimming pool. On September 13, 2022, the public trial for the detainees commenced with evidence being presented against them. The prosecution faced challenges proving Harry Bowden's and Luis Carlos's involvement. Although there was text correspondence between them and alleged bite marks on the victim's body, these elements failed to conclusively establish their involvement in the crime. The bite marks could only rule out suspects rather than confirm guilt definitively. Hence, all hotel employees were ruled out as suspects. However, Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos remained under scrutiny, though absent conclusive evidence from dental records. In contrast, significant evidence was collected against Theodore Herrera. There was a blood trail along with wounds on his body inflicted by Maria Luisa in her self-defense attempts. Her blood was found under Herrera's fingernails as well as on his shoes, watch, and cell phone located in his room during the search. Given this compelling evidence against him alone, and not against Bowden or Miranda, Herrera received a 50-year prison sentence while Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda were acquitted due to insufficient physical evidence linking them directly to the crime. Many believe these two men were also involved in the murder because the hotel security cameras mysteriously stopped working on that fateful. This suggests someone orchestrated this situation. Another individual, a hotel security guard, came under suspicion. Yet like the other two suspects, he couldn't be arrested due to insufficient evidence. Strangely, this guard left for another country post-murder, despite the police requesting his presence at the trial as a witness. Several aspects of this case hint at wider involvement. For instance, two guests reported a significant power outage at the hotel the night of the murder. Such an event might have been deliberate to disable security cameras and magnetic keys. Another odd detail is that investigators only searched the hotel owner's private office 9 days after the murder. This delay could have provided ample time to remove any incriminating evidence. Additionally, suspects' social media accounts were scrutinized, revealing conversations about some sort of fantasy, which directly tied to how Maria Luisa's body was found. Legally speaking, Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda are innocent. There is no accusation directed at them here. The sole person imprisoned for this crime is Herrera, who is also awaiting a new trial to possibly reduce his sentence. Although this case is technically resolved, the Asinjo family believes there are lingering issues, some kind of concealment or defense mechanism in play. They mentioned receiving Maria Luisa's belongings soaked in blood from authorities, but couldn't comprehend why, since they hoped to preserve this evidence if new findings emerged. Despite being content with Herrera's conviction, they remain unsatisfied with the acquittal of Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lamu. Unhealthy relationships with a cruel person and a narcissist never lead to anything good. It's crucial to realize this in time and break off such connections before a tragedy occurs. Emotional abuse is typically just the beginning and a prelude to physical violence, which the abuser will use to control and dominate their partner, suppress them, and create an atmosphere of constant oppression and fear. Our story today revolves around a popular Chinese blogger, Lamu, whose tragic end a few years ago shocked all of China. Lamu, a simple girl from a poor family, captivated a large audience with her kindness, sincerity, and boundless love for nature, and met a horrific end at the hands of her once loved partner. The most chilling part of this incident is that the assault on her was broadcast live and thousands of followers could only watch helplessly. Lamu was born in 1990 in Yawa, Tibetan and Chang Autonomous Prefecture, Sichuan Province, China. She was the youngest of 3 children in a very poor family that barely made ends meet. She grew up with her older biological sister and stepbrother in a home shared with their parents and grandmother. Their family collected rare medicinal plants, which they sold in local pharmacies for a meager income. After completing only 3 grades, Lama had to leave school to work with her family members and help support them. Along with the adults, she climbed high into the mountains, where at certain times and in special places, they could find the rarest herbs and flowers with healing properties. Lama was well versed in these plants and had a sincere love for nature, admiring its beauty and generosity and drawing strength and inspiration from the mountains. As social media popularity grew, she created her own account on a Chinese equivalent of TikTok. There, Lama posted short videos showcasing her daily life, household activities, and the beauty of her native province. She called herself a mountain girl and had a deep affection for her work. Unlike many bloggers, she was not chasing fame. Fame found her. Her audience adored Lama for her smile, purity, and almost childlike spontaneity. She never prepared content in advance, speaking her mind and feelings and sometimes singing folk songs while showcasing the mountain landscapes. Lama never used makeup or filters. Her hands and feet bore calluses, scratches and scars, visibly evidencing the hard and long labor behind them. Gradually, Lama's subscriber count grew, and not only locals, but also tourists visiting the area began to recognize her. They referred to the blogger as that sweet mountain girl, offered warm words, expressed gratitude for her work, and asked for photos. Lama was not proud of her fame, but she was delighted that her activities resonated with the audience and brought joy to others. In her youth, Lama constantly went to the mountains with her parents and older sister. But as her sister grew up, got married, and moved to another province, and her parents, due to age, could no longer climb high or for long, Lama took on all the work herself. She detailed to her followers the flora of the local area, explaining which specific flowers and herbs had what properties, how to collect them, and how to use them as food without accidentally harming the body. During certain seasons, Lama could spend several weeks alone in the mountains, gathering medicinal plants. She showed how she set up camps for the night, cooked her meals over a campfire, shared local legends and beliefs, and returned with a large and heavy backpack that seemed to weigh more than she did. But this strong, brave, and hard-working beauty never elicited pity, because she glowed with happiness when engaging in her beloved activities in the mountains. Despite returning tired, worn out and with bloody calluses, and despite never complaining about her tough fate and hard daily labor, Lama long avoided one topic. She did not discuss her personal life because she suffered for many years at the hands of her abusive husband, Tong Li, enduring beatings and humiliations. But she tried not to show that she was deeply unhappy. Tong Li was also a native of Sichuan province, born in 1990 into a simple and quite modest family. His parents adored their youngest son, indulging him from an early age, always striving to spoil and please him. At the age of 12, he quit school and started working as a courier, delivering groceries to local stores. He earned little but kept all the money to himself, not helping his family at all. Even then, the teenager began to show signs of greed, avarice, and narcissism. He believed the world revolved around him, that others owed him, but he owed nothing to anyone, desperate to become wealthy. He was willing to do anything, even break the law, and that's precisely what happened. At 15, Tong left home, fell in with the wrong crowd, and began dealing in banned substances and petty theft. He also dabbled in gambling, and took pride in getting away with it. He aimed to earn respect in the criminal underworld, become rich, and escape the poverty he grew up in. Sometime later, Li's parents opened their own small spice and tea shop, investing all their efforts and resources into it. The business quickly took off, generating a decent income, and the family soon became well off by local standards. At that point, Tong decided to return home and offered to help expand and promote the family business. In reality, he just wanted to live off his relatives who worked hard daily. Tong considered himself successful and wealthy, spending money on personal luxuries, boasting to friends about his expensive items, and behaving selfishly, even claiming the store's success as his own. Meanwhile, he kept in touch with local criminals, maintaining a separate under-the-table business with them. First love, Tong and Lama met when they were just 17. The young man was so enchanted by her beauty, kindness, and sincerity that he was head over heels in love. He courted her earnestly, giving gifts, and it seemed he was ready to change for her, become more mature and serious, and cut ties with the criminal world. The young and naive Lama quickly fell for his charms, believing she had met her prince charming with whom she would be happy. No one had ever courted her so diligently before, and no one had tried so hard to win her over. Soon, the young couple developed a romantic relationship that lasted almost 2 years before they decided to make it official. As soon as Tong turned 19, he proposed to his beloved, who eagerly accepted. However, their parents were not thrilled about their decision to marry. They tried to dissuade the young couple, believing they were too young to start a family. But the young lovers wouldn't listen to anyone. In 2009, they got married and the newlywed wife moved into her mother-in-law's house, Lama's personal hell. Initially, married life seemed quite blissful. Tong tried to be a good husband, left behind his bad influences and gambling, focusing on his young wife and the family business. Lama took on almost all the household duties and also helped her beloved's parents in their shop. However, it wasn't long before her husband started disappearing with his old friends again. He returned to his unlawful activities, frequently consumed alcohol, and his behavior towards his wife drastically changed. Tong was no longer the gentle, kind, and caring man Lama had fallen in love with a few years earlier. He became crude, self-centered, and aggressive. He took a portion of the store's earnings from a business where all the family members worked, except for him, claiming it as his share, and spent all the money on his own needs, entertainments, and pleasures. The couple started arguing frequently. Lama tried to reason with her husband, urging him to get his act together, work honestly, quit drinking, and stop associating with people from the criminal world. But Tong wouldn't listen to either his wife or his mother, believing no one had the right to tell him what to do. According to his parents' recollections, conflicts in their home became a daily occurrence. The situation didn't change even when Lama became pregnant. Her husband continued to vanish with his friends, and when he returned home, he was rough and aggressive. He was annoyed that his wife was now more focused on herself and their future child. He himself, like a child, demanded attention, and during one disagreement, he raised his hand to her for the first time. Lama was shocked by her husband's action and declared she would return to her parents' home as she refused to tolerate such treatment. At that moment, her mother-in-law, who had unintentionally witnessed the incident, intervened. She approached her son and slapped him twice, telling him he had no right to treat the mother of his future child that way. Afterwards, the woman convinced her daughter-in-law to stay, promising that it would not happen again. Lama believed her and decided to give her husband another chance, a decision she would bitterly regret as it was just the beginning of a real nightmare. From then on, Tong regularly became physically abusive, only to apologize afterward, crying and begging her not to leave him. Each time, Lama wanted to believe he had come to his senses and would genuinely change, but the cycle repeated over and over. When she finally decided to leave her husband, he threatened to take their son away and do something terrible to her and her parents. Frightened, the young mother stayed, fearing he would carry out his threats. From then on, their child became his main tool for manipulation and blackmail. Lama told none of her relatives about the nightmare unfolding in her husband's home. Even her older sister, with whom she had been very close since childhood, suspected nothing. In 2012, after a long and severe illness, Lama's mother passed away, which was a huge shock for her. Her elderly father and grandmother were left virtually helpless, and she found herself literally living between two homes, managing to maintain order, cook, and help with the household chores everywhere. Meanwhile, Lama continued to regularly climb the mountains for herbs to financially support both families. Only in the mountains, amidst the hard work, paradoxically, could she rest, be alone with her thoughts, stay and breathe freely without fear of her disgruntled husband coming home, causing a scene, and hitting her again. In 2017, the woman gave birth to a second son. Relations with her husband remained strained, and her mother-in-law had long stopped trying to intervene on her daughter-in-law's behalf, though she took on all the care of the grandchildren when Lama went to work in the mountains. Around the same time, Lama created her account on Douyin, Chinese TikTok, where she started posting short videos showcasing the local beauty, discussing various flowers and herbs, their medicinal properties, and how to use them. Engaging with her audience became the outlet Lama desperately needed to keep from going insane. Sometimes she quietly sang songs for her followers, and sometimes danced against the backdrop of mountain ridges. She always appeared happy, smiling genuinely, and never once complained to her audience about her difficult fate, or mentioned the domestic violence she regularly endured. In 2019, Lama's beloved grandmother passed away, and the blogger posted a video for the first time where she was crying, expressing her deep pain over losing a family member. Her numerous followers sincerely supported her, unlike her husband, who instead of showing sympathy, became furious and struck her face because she was sobbing. In January 2020, after enduring another severe incident of violence, Lama finally decided to leave her tyrannical husband. She took her sons, moved back to her parents' home, and filed for divorce. Around the same time, Lama recorded a new video stating that for the first time in a long while, she felt calm and confident. In the video, It was evident she tried to cover up a large bruise under her eye with concealer. However, she never disclosed to anyone the domestic abuse she had suffered for years. Regrettably, during the divorce proceedings, the court divided custody of the sons, leaving the younger child with the mother and the older with the father. This decision was a devastating blow for Lamu, and her now ex-husband unexpectedly changed tactics by romantically pursuing her again, proposing they start over and not break up the family. He swore he had realized his mistakes, wanted them and the boys to live together again, and promised to acknowledge all his past errors and never repeat them. For a couple of months, Tong put on the act of a repentant man. He gave flowers, created real celebrations for the family, tried to help his ex-wife around the house, and even joined her on mountain trips, which he had never done before. Lama's heart softened, and she believed that he had genuinely changed. By the end of March, the couple remarried. As you might guess, the fairy tale ended as soon as Lamu returned to her husband's house. Tong reverted to being cruel, mean and selfish, and within 2 weeks of remarrying, he brutally attacked his wife, nearly beating her to death. When Lamu interacted with her followers, he snatched the phone from her hands and hurled it against the wall, shattering it. Then he began to beat her with his fists and feet, giving her no chance to escape. Battered and barefoot, Lamu fled the house and immediately went to the police, seeking protection. But they only took her statement and advised her to try to resolve the family conflict on her own. After that, Lamu decided to hide from her husband in another village to avoid endangering her relatives. Enraged, her husband was ready to end the life of his runaway wife, but did not know where to find her. He assumed she might have gone to her sister's house. He visited the sister's home and began yelling, demanding she tell him where Lamu was. The woman knew nothing about it and asked him to leave. Then Tong repeatedly struck her in the face with all his might. At that moment, her husband was at work, so there was no one to protect the unfortunate woman. She suffered a fractured cheekbone and eye socket, and her nose was broken. After the second victim also filed a police report, Tong was finally held accountable administratively, but he was not arrested. Nevertheless, Tong laid low while the second divorce proceedings were underway, not attempting to contact his wife. Unfortunately, this time around, the court, in dissolving the marriage, left both sons with the father as the Lee family was wealthy and money proved to be the deciding factor. The heartbroken mother was crushed with grief. Her close ones urged her to leave the village for a while, fearing the ex-husband would seek revenge and possibly do something dreadful. However, Lamu refused, wanting to be near her boys. 3 weeks after the second divorce, Lamu went to the mountains, where she recorded a video of herself singing and dancing. Apparently, this was her way of trying to relieve stress, but her ex-husband interpreted it as her celebrating their separation, which blinded him with rage. On the evening of September 14, 2020, around 8, Lamu started a live stream to chat with her followers. She was dressed in a traditional Tibetan outfit, softly singing folk songs. She put a finger to her lips, whispering that they needed to be quiet, because her father and visiting stepbrother were already asleep while she prepared breakfast treats for them. At that moment, a terrible noise erupted off camera, as if someone had kicked the door in. The blogger turned pale, frozen in fear, her eyes wide with horror. She stared at the person entering, then suddenly jumped up, clearly trying to escape. The tripod with her smartphone fell camera down, but the broadcast continued. Viewers could not see what was happening in the room, but could hear everything. Heavy footsteps were heard, followed by the sound of a liquid splashing on the floor and walls. Lama started screaming for help. Then her father's voice pleaded with the intruder to calm down and put down the knife. Lama warned her family that the room was doused in gasoline and begged them to save themselves. A sinister silence fell for a few seconds, then the click of a lighter, followed by a piercing scream, was heard. The broadcast cut off as the crackle of flames spreading through the room intensified. Followers were in disbelief, unwilling to accept that they had witnessed a tragedy, with some even speculating it was a cruel prank. Unfortunately, the worst had occurred. Tong decided to brutally exact revenge on his ex-wife for daring to leave him. He rode a motorcycle to Lama's house, bringing along a canister of gasoline and a large knife. Through the windows, he saw his ex-wife in the kitchen on the ground floor and kicked the door leading to the room. Tong caught Lama off guard. She barely understood what was happening before she tried to flee, but he prevented her from escaping. Tong doused Lama with fuel and wounded her with the knife before setting the house on fire. At that moment, her father and brother ran outside, shouting for neighbors to help, but they did not understand what was happening or the seriousness of the situation. As the flames erupted, her relatives rushed back into the house, but the old wooden beams, burning like torches, collapsed, blocking the entrance. It took firefighters about 2 hours to extinguish the fire. When they entered, they found Lamo in the room, her skin charred black and in places literally melted and stuck to the floor. Incredibly, Lama was still breathing with a faint pulse detectable. She was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors were horrified by her condition. Over 90% of her body surface was burned, and her lungs had nearly cooked from the heated air and smoke, but she desperately continued to fight for her life. She was in a deep coma, and her condition was deemed critical. Nevertheless, the city's burn center was prepared to help, but the treatment cost was a staggering $1,000,000. A summer family could not afford after losing everything in the fire. Then, Lama's father decided to seek help from her followers. He wrote a letter explaining that her ex-husband had attacked her, attempting to end her life, but she had survived, and doctors held out a slim hope. However, the family simply didn't have the funds for her medical treatment. The letter was posted on her social account, along with a plea from her sister to all compassionate people to help Lamu, providing an account number for donations. The necessary funds for treatment were raised within an hour of the post, and people continued to send money. Lamu was transferred to the burn center, where she received the needed care. Her condition was stabilized, and at one point, it even seemed she might recover. However, tragically, after 2 weeks of fighting for her life, her heart could not endure any longer, and she passed away without regaining consciousness. She was only 30 years old. At the trial, Tong's mother desperately defended her son, who had inflicted such cruelty, claiming that he did it out of intense love for his ex-wife and stress from their divorce. Nevertheless, the verdict was severe and just. The court found Lee guilty of deliberate, cruel deprivation of life, and sentenced him to death, additionally mandating his family to compensate Lama's relatives for the property lost due to the house fire. Tong attempted to appeal the verdict several times through appellate motions, but the decision remained unchanged. In July 2022, the sentence was carried out. Tong Li was executed that same day, 2 years after the tragic event that ended a young woman's life. Her relatives rebuilt the house on the site of the burned one and were able to move back in. On the ground floor, her sister set up a small memorial altar with photographs of Lamu. The court left the orphan boys in the custody of their paternal grandparents. The Li family remained one of the wealthiest in the village, and the judges believed they could provide the children with better living conditions. Hello was an exceptional talent and was highly admired by the teachers and staff at Garden City Middle School. Hello's youngest daughter met a similar fate, succumbing to the same violent methods as her mother and being placed beside her, which raised red flags. Officials from the college reached out to the hotel, urging them to conduct a welfare check on Stephanie and her family. Around 3 p.m., a housekeeper tried to enter the family's room on the 10th floor, but found the door locked and no one answered. The housekeeper told other staff members what happened. A hotel manager then went into the room and found William Parente's lifeless body in the bathroom. He had ended his life with a knife. The manager called emergency services, reporting a loss of $450,000. Financial investigations revealed that checks totaling $245,000